The story begins with the boy kneeling before the saint and asking her for help. He promised to give her whatever she asked for. So could she give it to him? The guy wanted to get that one and only chance to be there and help her. When she turned 24, our heroine was transported to another reality. She had no idea where she was. In any case, after waking up, it became clear that this was a different world. She immediately noticed the different hair color and clothes. As soon as she turned to look back, she noticed a whole crowd of people in front of her bowing to her. One of them turned to the girl and said that he was glad to welcome her. God bless her. Our heroine, of course, didn't understand what this meant. Once here, she became Saint Emilian. Even with her acting talent, it wasn't easy to become a saint in one day. However, learning from her own mistakes, she was able to hold out here for 6 months already. To some extent, she was recognized as a saint, so she could freely visit the palace. Our heroine suddenly realized that she just wanted to stroll through the garden, so she came earlier, but on her way, she encountered the Duke's daughter, Linella Nestro, confused. She asked her interlocutor if he was telling the truth. Next to her, it seemed, was the son of some marquise. The boy told Linella that it wasn't hard for him at all. The kind and beautiful daughter of the Duke of Linella Nestro, a famous figure. If this world were a novel, she would definitely be the main character. At first, Emilian even envied her, because there were always a lot of handsome men around her. But now she's very glad she didn't fall in love with one of the men hanging around her. So we have a main character who's being bullied. Following her is the main character, who is eternally in love with her and runs after her. And of course, the saint who lost her head over the main character, who would soon turn into a villain. Although she has a lot to learn, there is no time to think about men when she is busy with work all day. In any case, what is most important is that the difference in the behavior of men with Linella and with our heroine was noticeable to the naked eye. Love and recognition directed at one person, so Emilian did not expect much, since their attention was not focused on her. Eventually, the Marquis's son gave the girl something which delighted her immensely. She promised that all expenses would be reimbursed by the duchy. The boy, surprised, said there was no point in doing that, because it was a gift from the heart. He immediately handed her the book. However, Linella Nestro said that this wouldn't do. This kind of thing must be paid for. But she was still very happy. She also said that she would soon have a meeting with the crown prince, so she didn't know how to leaving Mr. Itoa behind. The guy immediately became embarrassed. Our heroine laughed and couldn't believe her eyes. Were they really flirting? However, at that moment, she noticed a very suspicious look from Lady Linella. Our heroine recognized it instantly. A most astonishing pretense, or rather acting. It all seemed like a wonderful performance. One way or another, our heroine turned around and went about her business, even though the whole situation was very interesting. After a while, the girl greeted His Highness. The man told her to sit down. Emilian was surprised he invited her, but in the end, he didn't even say hello. The guy had his nose in the air just because he was a prince. However, the crown prince of the Veseloyal Empire, Casadora Macron Veseloyal, told our heroine that he wanted to talk to her. The girl said she was listening to him. To herself, she thought how handsome he was, but unfortunately, he didn't have the personality. Casadora Macron reminded her that there would soon be a hunting competition, which would be organized by the imperial family. But after that, there would be a banquet, and he would need her help. Emilian immediately assumed that someone was forcing him, and at that moment, the guy said that because Nella insisted, he wanted her to take part. Nella, that's the affectionate nickname for the Duke's daughter. In any case, she should have listened to him. Emilian asked if she could find out the reason for his help. Casadora Macron told her that it was his guess, but he had recently reported to the shrine about an increase in the number of monsters. Since the competition will take place in the large forest, there's a high chance of encountering monsters. Nella worries about him and wants the saint to be nearby. Our heroine coldly said she understood. However, did his daughter truly love the Duke if she cared about him, even so? Although she immediately remembered how Linella Nestro had flirted with that man a minute ago. In that case, what if behind that sweet and innocent smile, there are actually hidden insidious plans? Casadora Macron suddenly said that he knew very well that she did not visit such places. However, he asked that Lady Nestro's wishes be respected and that his invitation be accepted. Seeing Casadora Macron's smile, our heroine was shocked. Could this man really smile? Emilian sighed heavily and said she agreed to take part in it. In that case, he said that their conversation was over. She could go because Nella should arrive soon. Oddly enough, immediately after meeting the Marquis's son, she decided to see the Crown Prince. Regardless, Emilian smiled at the prince and said goodbye. Nevertheless, the girl looked to the side and sadly thought about how sad it was that she would not be able to meet Lady Nestro's entire harem. Suddenly, the Halo Empire's thinker Lastuen approached our heroine. He was delighted to meet Lady Emilian. The girl smiled and said the feeling was mutual, then asked in surprise if he was actually heading somewhere. The guy replied that Lady Nestro had invited him. Our heroine immediately decided to broach the subject. She said surprised that she had a meeting with His Highness. Had something really happened? Halo looked at her in horror, unsure if this was true or a joke. After all, the girl had told him she'd only invited him. Emilian immediately assumed that he had been scammed too, but decided to calm him down, saying that there was some kind of problem. In any case, I felt sorry for the guy, but now everything became clear to Emilian. The image of the innocent, stupid girl Lanella Nestro, who everyone around her fell in love with, was just a mask. Meanwhile, Halo Lastuen began to move away in bewilderment, and our heroine whispered to herself that she was very surprised at how she was pretending to be nice. It's much more interesting to watch than a truly kind and sincere person. It was all amusing. By evening, our heroine was already thinking about the hunting competition. Was the Duke's daughter worried about her men, or was she planning something else? Suddenly, our heroine began to feel an unknown pain and writhes from it. Soon she fell asleep, remembering that feeling. It was the future God was showing her, the so-called prophecy. Just a few hours later, Emilian jumped up in horror. Perplexed by what she'd learned would happen at the competition, a monster would appear. The action shifts to the following evening. People at the fountain were chatting about various things. Somehow, rumors even started to circulate. It turned out that 5 monsters had already been spotted in Sarthion County. The man asked if the Count and Countess were okay. The interlocutor replied that it was fortunate they managed to resolve everything in time. The knights used the commoners as bait and defeated all the monsters. It was thanks to this that the county escaped without casualties. However, the people who made the monster bait died. One of the men laughed, saying that's what he expected from the Count. He destroyed the monsters and got rid of the pathetic commoners. Excellent strategy. Our heroine was perplexed by the world in which such actions are praised and admired. Emilian didn't really understand why she ended up here and became a saint. She sat on the bed again, thinking about what she had seen. She had had the dream a second time. The prophecy spoke of the appearance of monsters. Monsters are beasts of chaos, so they are dangerous to humans. However, they have one weakness. This weakness is divine power, so it is the sanctuary that is responsible for their extermination. One way or another, the problem is that there's too little information about these monsters. The prophecy didn't say how many there would be or what level they would be. If it was a low-level monster, then even ordinary knights could handle it. But monsters above the average level can only be killed with the help of divine power. She immediately wondered if she should report the prophecy, so the hunting competition would be cancelled. But if she did, the aristocrats would use bait again. She couldn't drag people into all this and let it happen again. She was sure those jerks wouldn't cancel the tournament, just for that reason. In that case, she decided to observe first. Either way, she was glad to have been invited to the event. At that moment, a guy knocked on Lady Emilian's door and said that it was Lenevin, and he was already back. The girl got out of bed and walked toward the door to open it. She knew it was time for dinner. Opening the door, she saw Lenevin, the high priest, standing before her. The young man welcomed God's grace. Our heroine greeted him and said she thought he'd be late because he'd left so quickly. Lenevin said he couldn't disobey her order. However, Emilian realized that this wasn't an order at all, and in any case, it was correct. She asked him to follow her to the dining room. Already walking down the corridor, one could notice how Lenevin often glanced in Emilian's direction. Finally noticing this, the girl decided to turn around and ask what happened. The guy immediately turned his head away, apologized, and said that everything was fine. The girl was naturally surprised, but didn't pay much attention. Emilian decided to change the subject and asked where he'd gone during the day. She noticed that he looked very worried when he came to ask permission to leave for a while. The guy admitted that Lady Lanella Nestro had summoned him and offered him and the thinker to take part in a hunting competition. Emilian had fully expected this. Anyway, she said she was glad it wasn't serious, because she'd been starting to worry seeing him in such a hurry. The guy admitted that Lady Nestro had never called him first, and that he had probably just gotten nervous without even noticing it. Emilian couldn't hide her smile at the realization that Lanella had even charmed the high priest. Our heroine decided to announce that she too would participate in the competition. Despite Lenevan's surprised question, our heroine began to wonder who would ultimately be the one and only winner who would be able to win her heart. The action shifts to the next day to Emilian's office. She's told that Lady Lanella Nestro has arrived to see her. Our heroine asked in surprise what the purpose of the visit was, to which the maid replied that the lady said she wanted to meet with her. Emilian was very surprised that the Duke's daughter appeared so suddenly, without even warning in advance. In any case, she sighed heavily and decided that she would still listen to her, so she asked her to take the lady to the living room and make tea. After some time, the girl finally appeared in the passage, and with a sweet smile told God's grace that she was glad to welcome her. Lenevan bowed down in embarrassment, and our heroine told the lady that they had not seen each other for quite some time. The girl said that she didn't want to take up her precious time with her sudden visit, but she needed to discuss something very important. Emilian asked if it was personal, and then immediately decided to let Lenevan go. Lanella Nestro cried out and said that wasn't necessary. She began to say that this was a very difficult topic for her, but she would feel better if Mr. Lenevan stayed nearby, so she asked to leave him alone. Our heroine immediately noticed the falseness in her words, but accepted her request, so she asked Lenevan to stay next to Lanella Nestro. The guy approached her and handed her a handkerchief. The girl thanked him and said that terrible things had been happening to her lately, which was why her eyes were watering. The girl, tears in her eyes, began to talk about how someone had recently started threatening her. Emilian, perplexed, asked what she was talking about. Lanella Nestro said that when she went to tea with Lady Charonde, she suddenly found a whole bunch of her knights killed. Our heroine asked again in surprise, and the lady continued to say that strange things were happening around her. Things would disappear from her, and sometimes she would even wake up in another room, but none of the maids saw or heard anything. At this point, our heroine couldn't comprehend what she was hearing with her own ears. Was Lanella Nestro once again demonstrating her acting talent, or was she telling the truth? One way or another, the girl ended up with increased security assigned to her, and her father was very worried about everything because the criminal had not yet been caught. The girl cried and clasped her hands, asking the saint to help her with this. Our heroine sighed, thinking that if she'd been informed about the monster prophecy, she should take on that too. The girl asked how she could help. Lanella Nestro cried out in disbelief, asking if this was true. Emilian agreed to a couple of days she would be responsible for her security and the search for the criminal. In that case, the lady said that her father would be diligently engaged in surveillance. There is no need to worry about that because she needs protection. Our heroine took a cup of tea and said she would come to the duchy and take on this task. From tomorrow until the start of the hunting tournament, Lanella Nestro was incredibly grateful. Soon Emilian asked Lenevan to escort the lady to the exit. Soon the guy led the girl after him, but at that moment our heroine still saw that very smile from Lanella Nestro. Our heroine could only laugh at this as she was amused by this kind of acting. The action shifts to the next day. A carriage was heading toward the duchy at this time. Of course, this carriage belonged to our heroine. Lanella Nestro met her and began thanking her for coming. Nevertheless, the Duke and Duchess of Nestro asked their daughter to be more polite. The woman greeted the grace of God, saying she was glad to see them. Lady Nestro also began to talk, almost with tears in her eyes, about how happy she was and how excited she was. Our heroine turned to the Duke and said that God would bless them. She didn't know that they would all decide to greet her together. The man said they had to do this because Nella had traveled so far for her safety. They asked her to make herself at home. Immediately, Lanella Nestro took the saint by the hand and invited her to go inside. The girl assured our heroine that while she was visiting them, she would take good care of her. After some time, they finally reached a corridor along which they were moving somewhere. Looking around, our heroine said that this is exactly how she imagined Duke Nestro's estate. This family is obscenely rich. However, the girl still decided to look at Lanella Nestro and thought for a bit. The girl noticed someone staring at her, So she turned around and asked Emilion in surprise if she wanted to ask her anything. The girl replied that she looked completely different. Lanella asked what it meant, and our heroine said she seemed too desperate yesterday. The girl thanked her for her concern and said she had a saint by her side today. That's why the girl felt safe around Emilion. Our heroine said she was very happy about it, but it was a complete lie, and even her tears were an act. In any case, she doesn't understand whether there's any truth to her tales. Judging by her parents' reactions, this is indeed cause for concern. Well, or maybe she really was threatened with something, and she saw this as an opportunity. Lanella Nestro suddenly asked the saint if she wanted to have lunch together. Our heroine understood she still had time, so she would learn everything slowly. She agreed to the proposal. A short while later, the girl was sitting at the table, eating dinner, with a beautiful but up-to-the-minute girl. Not a bad evening. Somehow realizing that there were no men next to her, she was now feeling rather bored. In any case, she decided that she would have to make plans for next time. Suddenly, Lanella Nestro raised her head and coldly asked the saint why she was so active. Our heroine was horrified by the change in voice and the ensuing atmosphere, so she even fell silent for a while. Nella suddenly said that her voice sounded strange, so she asked not to be misunderstood. She asked out of pure curiosity. Looking at Emilion, the girl said she was too different from the previous saints. Our heroine heard these words quite often. When she first came into this world, the saint was treated well, but the treatment of the sanctuary was terrible. Since people were endowed with divine power from birth, they possessed excessive kindness. In other words, they were never in a favorable position. Even if someone took away their share, they accepted it without protesting. By her standards, the life of the sanctuary lay somewhere between abstinence and poverty. Unlike previous saints, she began to improve the system in the temple. Our heroine said she'd answered this question several times during the meeting. She hoped it had been clarified, but apparently Nella hadn't heard it yet. The girl said it was all for the preservation of the sanctuary. The saint was chosen from outside to prevent the church from facing a dark future. Emilion nodded and said it was absolutely true. Nella continued saying that the sanctuary was currently thriving, but the saint still acts as if she is missing something and wants to know what it is. Our heroine thought for a moment and soon said she agreed. Greed overcame her. Anyway, she raised her glass and said that if she continued to try hard, then things will get much better soon. She took a sip shortly after. Lanella Nestro clapped her hand loudly, but quite calmly, and soon sat silently. The action shifts to the day of the hunting competition. Today, our heroine's work protecting Lady Nestro has finally come to an end. Lenevin smiled and credited God's grace for her efforts. Emilion replied that she hadn't seen anything that could threaten Lady Nestro. The high priest asked about the Duke's investigation. Our heroine said they hadn't discussed it, but judging by the atmosphere, they'd reached a dead end. Ultimately, Lanella Nestro made her nervous about the murder, and her reaction was strange. Emilion couldn't let it go. The girl said they needed to send a priest to help them with the investigation. At that moment, all the ladies exclaimed in surprise. The reason for this was the carriage from which the handsome Prince Casadora Macron began to emerge. All the girls started commenting on how handsome and charismatic he was today. Emilion just snorted, saying his carriage sparkled from miles away. Soon after, the Prince Lady Nestro followed him, and Casadora Macron offered her hand. People's admiration instantly turned to shock, as they couldn't understand how this could happen. Emilion laughed at this. At that moment, the girl jumped out of the carriage, and seeing a friend, immediately ran towards him. Looking at Enesis, she told him that she was very glad that he came here. This guy was Duke Anisis Cajun, aka a childhood friend of our sweet lady Lanella Nestro. You can tell from his eyes that he's in love with her. If you count the thinker standing over there are already 4 men gathered here who are interested in Lady Nestro. Emilion decided she needed to remain vigilant, but she was still very interested in watching. Suddenly, Nella saw the saint and cried out joyfully. Everyone started whispering in surprise. Who was Emilion? Noticing her pink hair, they realized she was a saint, but they had no idea she visited such places. People assumed she was close to Lady Nestro, and our heroine assumed the girl was attracting everyone's attention. Emilion smiled and greeted the lady. At that moment, Enesis approached her and reminded her about the scarf Lanella Nestro told him she'd just gotten it ready. When knights go to war in the Empire, the knight's lover gives him her handkerchief. With this, she blesses him and wishes him to return victorious. Lanella Nestro held up a scarf and said it was embroidered in Inesis's favorite color. She asked him if he liked it. The guy smiled and told her to tie the scarf around her wrist. He definitely wasn't going anywhere from here. After this, our heroine turned her gaze to the crown prince and found a similarity in the fact that there was also a handkerchief on his sword. The young man approached Duke Cassian and said that all preparations were complete, so it was time to move on. He gave the girl a demonstrative hug. Soon the boys headed forward with Lanella Nestro waving and wishing them victory. Emilian also wished them a safe journey. His Highness the Crown Prince said he would return soon. Anisis, bowing his head, thanked the girl for her wishes. The action moves forward a bit. The stately princesses were complimenting the Duchess. Our heroine, in turn, stood on the defensive. At that very moment, loud screams and incredible shortness of breath were heard from behind her. Turning around, she noticed a knight in front of her, who had fallen to his knees and was calling out to the saint in horror. Emilian approached him and asked him to catch his breath, and soon asked what happened. Finally catching his breath, the boy said that His Highness had been attacked by a monster in the forest. Our heroine was utterly terrified. This news caused a mild panic. Nevertheless, our heroine, perplexed, asked how this had even happened. Monsters! She said they should have avoided casualties altogether. The knight apologized and said the signal fire simply didn't light. Emilian looked down and said it wasn't his fault. She hadn't found any traces during her initial examination. So how did they appear? The guy said the monster was probably above average size. Many people went to the scene, but most were injured. Emilian asked to give her the exact location because she needed to send reinforcements there. However, at that very moment, someone began to shout in confusion and stop Lady Nestro, who was heading into the forest. Our heroine immediately clicked her tongue and asked what was wrong with that girl. Where was she running? Not understanding what was happening, the girl decided to run after Lady Nestro. She ran figuring it was unlikely Nella would have run there without any second thoughts. Had she really trusted her to protect her rear? Emilian still didn't know, but she understood that the lady was clearly counting on something. Suddenly, our heroine stopped as the strong smell of blood hit her nose. Meanwhile, Lady Nestro sat next to the prince, asking him to be patient, for the saint would soon arrive, and the monsters would be killed. The young man smiled and told her that only she had come at such a moment. Lanella Nestro asked him with tears in her eyes, "Who else if not her?" The prince said everything was fine. Emilian, noticing the prince, was glad, because at least he could speak. However, at that moment, the guy heard a strange rustling sound behind him in the bushes, so he immediately turned around. With all his strength, he threw the dagger, which cut Emilian's cheek, and soon became embedded in a tree. The guy himself was scared, and Lanella Nestro was perplexed, and at the same time screamed joyfully. Anyway, the lady asked for His Highness to be healed. Our heroine said it would only take a moment. Having begun to treat the Crown Prince's wounds, she was even surprised that he was still conscious despite such injuries. However, she noticed that the recovery was very slow, which meant suddenly Lady Nestro's voice was heard from behind, asking why it was healing so poorly. Emilian explained that it was because of the monster's venom. The wound was starting to open up, despite her healing powers. Anyway, she said she'd provided first aid, and once the poison was completely out of his system, he'd feel better. First, they'd need to... The saint didn't have time to finish her plan of action, because at that very moment, she heard and soon saw a huge monster behind hers. The Crown Prince immediately jumped up and asked Lady Nestro to step back. However, the Crown Prince was also asked to stand behind them. The boy was surprised. These words came from the mouth of Emilian, who told them that she would protect them. Then the girl looked at the monster's secretions and wondered, had the prince really been wounded by this acid-like poison? The monster's body was heavily scarred from the battle with the knights, and its speed was slow. Could it be that it was tired? Our heroine had never encountered a monster above a lower level before, so she was nervous, but she thought she could handle it. At that very moment, a pile of poison flew past Emilian, who was taking off her gloves. The girl knew for sure that if it hit her, she wouldn't be able to cope. She was lucky she managed to dodge it, but if the monster surrounded her, she'd be finished. At that moment, she began examining the giant, wondering if he had any injuries incompatible with life. She soon noticed one. Now was the perfect time to attack, when the monster had not yet decided on its target. As she began casting magic, her hand began to glow. The girl realized she only had one chance. At that very moment, she began to attack. Shortly after, there was a loud explosion, followed by a flash. As soon as the prince raised his head, he noticed a monster with a huge hole in its body standing before him. The guy covering Lady Nestro with his body looked at the monster in surprise and asked if he was dead. Our heroine kicked him to check and immediately said that he was dead. She was worried that he would smell the blood, but it was still good that the monster did not focus on it. In this case, the girl approached the prince and holding out her hand told them to get up. Lady Nestro reacted instantly and turned the attention to herself, saying that he would help Prince Casadora get up. At that moment, our heroine looked at her hand and thought about how long it would take her to wash all of this off. Suddenly, the crown prince grabbed her hand and said that they had to go. Emilian, though, surprised, said she agreed. Still, it was all strange. He was supposed to be wiping away Lady Nestro's tears, but then why did he ignore her? At that moment, our heroine heard screams behind them. She remembered the people who had fought the monster, so she immediately called out to His Highness. The boy didn't give a sign the first time, so Emilian repeated it, but louder. The prince turned around in surprise and asked what had happened. Putting on her glove, the girl said that there were still wounded there, so she needed to leave. Lynella Nestro looked out from behind Casadora Macron in surprise and told the saint that she must first heal His Highness. Emilian, knowing the rules and values of this world, understood this, but still told them to go back, because there would be priests waiting for them who would help. However, the guy started to say what he wanted. But at that very moment, Lady Nestro started to say that they needed to go back. If he gets sick, she'll suffer. She said he shouldn't like it when she gets hurt. Emilian wasn't even surprised that in such a situation, Lynella Nestro didn't stop playing. While the girl continued to cry and beg His Highness to come back, our heroine turned around and wished them luck, and she left. In the end, Prince and Lady Nestro turned around and went their way, but the guy still looked after Emilian. Soon evening fell, because Emilian had brought many priests. The situation was quickly brought under control, and there were no casualties. Now our heroine understood that she had remained to cure the prince, who had been poisoned by the monster. But still, at that moment, the bewildered cries of Enesis were heard asking Nella if she understood what she was doing. The girl looked at him in bewilderment and asked why the hell he was yelling at her. Looking at these two, our heroine couldn't even understand why the situation turned out this way. A minute earlier, our heroine was telling the crown prince that she had done all she could at that moment, and besides, the wound had already healed. He will only feel pain because of the poison remaining in his body, but this pain will go away and get better over time, so there is no need to worry. Lynella Nestro asked in surprise if her strength wasn't enough to flush all the poison out of her body. Emilian said it would require too many sacrifices. That's why she said that as a saint, she couldn't allow the prince to lose consciousness from unbearable pain. In that case, the boy agreed. Our heroine suddenly told him that she advised him to visit the sanctuary for a while. If he stayed under the shade of the healing tree, he would recover faster. However, she noticed that he was lost in thought. This was not surprising, since he did not want the imperial family to be indebted to the shrine. Overall, he looks healthy, so he should do it himself. At that moment, Casadora Macron said that he would do so. Our heroine was very surprised by this answer, so she asked if he was serious. The boy said it was true, and then asked what the problem was. Emilian said everything was fine, and then asked Lady Nestro to help His Highness. They needed someone to look after him while he was going to the temple, and she more than anyone else was concerned about his well-being. So she was the right person. Lynella Nestro immediately agreed. She would be honored. She would very much like His Highness to recover quickly. In that case, she said he was about to recover. The guy said a drawn-out thank you. However, she asked him to thank the saint, not her. She would be there for him, so he wouldn't get bored. Emilian noticed that she was still masterfully pretending. Does she really want to strengthen her position next to the crown prince? This is the question our heroine asked herself. Everyone knew Casadora Macron would become emperor in the future, but if she married him, she would no longer be able to dream of the harem she currently had. Maybe this girl wants to have a blast before her wedding. In that case, it would be a shame if at that moment, Enesis burst into the room. Lynella Nestro looked at her friend in surprise. He started yelling at her and asking her what she was doing. Did she even understand? The girl asked why he was yelling, and Inesis asked how she could run into the forest all alone. What if something happened to her? Lanella Nestro told him not to shout, and then said that she could not sit idly by, while His Highness found himself in such a situation. The boy started saying that priests were supposed to come to the rescue. Lanella Nestro grabbed the saint and said she believed she would come for her. Our heroine didn't understand why the situation had turned out this way. Emilian, however, told Duke Cassian that His Highness needed peace and quiet now. Enesis immediately bowed and apologized to His Highness. The prince said that was not necessary. He himself was surprised to see Nella. By this world's standards, Lady Nestro's behavior is beyond reproach, for she rushed to help the crown prince of this empire himself. But still, the fact that Duke Cassian was so angry means that he was very worried about Lanella's condition. And by the way, she was sure the Duke was jealous because he was the crown prince. Besides, the two of them were also tense. At that moment, a woman entered the room and told the saint that His Highness's guard had arrived. This was good. Our heroine then told Lady Nestro that she was leaving the care of His Highness to her. The girl immediately grabbed the saint's hand and asked her to wait. She said that if Emilian didn't mind, she would like to return with her, as she was grateful to her for saving His Highness. Our heroine asked again, surprised. She wondered in her mind why Lanella didn't want to be alone with the crown prince. Immediately, Emilian turned her gaze to the prince, who also looked at her. Soon he turned his head and asked the saint to do as Nella asked. Our heroine was certainly very surprised, but she agreed anyway. Lanella Nestro happily began to express how happy she was. Already in the carriage, the girl had assumed the saint was tired, but still she hadn't expected anything else from her. She was after all a blessing from God. Emilian said she couldn't have acted any other way. The lady suddenly said that Enesis was actually right. In that situation, there was no point in going alone. She would have simply died. She began to say sheepishly that she had hoped and prayed until the very end, and yet, as if by a miracle, she had appeared. For a second, Emilian seemed like an angel to her. Our heroine smiled and told her it was her duty. In any case, Lanella Nestro said she owed her one and thanked her again. By the way, she said that if she needed help from the Duchy of Nestro, she could contact them at any time. Emilian was pleased. Still, it was incredible. Lanella Nestro's performance was simply incredible. If she hadn't noticed the hostility on the very first day she arrived at the Duke's estate, she wouldn't have realized now that all her words were lies. Lanella Nestro suddenly announced that the banquet was also cancelled because it couldn't be held after something like this happened. Emilian heard she'd been preparing everything for the banquet, so she understands her sadness. Sighing, the girl said that was true, and her brother was supposed to arrive too. She had so many plans. Emilian asked which brother she was talking about. Could it be that she has a brother or an heir to the duchy? Come to think of it, our heroine only knows that he's studying abroad. Lanella Nestro said he had to finish his studies and come back, so she asked if she could invite her when he arrived. She explained that they were planning a family get-together, so if the saint attended, the regret about the cancelled banquet would immediately disappear. However, our heroine said she wouldn't feel comfortable attending their family event. Lanella said it was fine, and that Enesis would be there too. But as Emilian could see, they had just had a fight, so she wasn't sure he would want to come to her. In turn, our heroine, on the contrary, thought that Duke Cassian would still appear to make peace. In that case, she thanked her for the invitation and asked if she could come with the priest who was assisting her. If it was Lenevin, Nella would be delighted. Today, the lady was busy with the prince and the duke, making Lenevin seem desperate. It would be interesting to see him try to stand out at their family dinner. At that very moment, Lanella Nestro asked the saint if she knew that her brother was a magician. Suddenly, something flew into the carriage and broke the glass, which flew into the salon where the girls were sitting. Our heroine covered Lady Nestro, but did not understand what was happening, why the carriage was attacked so suddenly. At that very moment, an unknown young man approached the carriage. Could it really be he who attacked them? At that moment, the guy just looked into the carriage in surprise and suddenly said that he had found her. Emilian still looked at him and did not understand who he was and how he dared to attack the sanctuary carriage. However, at that moment, the boy's expression changed in surprise. He wasn't prepared to see a saint inside. He asked what she was doing there. Our heroine screamed in bewilderment and said that this was the sanctuary's carriage, so it was logical that she would be in it. Was his answer satisfactory? Soon the girl asked to be allowed to ask her a question. She wanted to know who he was. Still, she felt like she'd seen this man somewhere. His face was all too familiar. One way or another, she wondered if it was he who had attacked the carriage. The boy lowered his head guiltily and quietly said it was him. At that moment, Lanella Nestro was finally able to open her eyes. At that very moment, she jumped up and cried out in bewilderment. "Brother?" She wanted to know why he was there, but Emilian didn't understand what was happening. One way or another, our heroine soon realized that this guy was most likely the heir to the Nestro duchy. Snapping his fingers, he announced that he had arrived much earlier than expected. Suddenly the carriage began to shake. Magic? As it turned out, he lifted them into the air to repair the carriage. Mages are as rare as priests, and he also possesses exceptional abilities. Nevertheless, Lady Nestro happily ran to her brother, and our heroine decided she could relax. Incidentally, the coachman and the horses were fine too. Anyway, our heroine glanced at the brother and sister and became lost in thought again. It was odd that she hadn't realized who they were right away, since they looked like their parents. Still, it was unexpected. She hadn't thought Lanella and her brother had such a good relationship. Soon after these thoughts, she noticed the smiles of the two, and was very surprised. And again they smiled as if they were playing, "What's wrong with the Duchy of Nestro?" At this point, Lanella Nestro decided to ask her brother why he attacked the carriage. The guy replied that he smelled the monster, so he decided to take forced measures. Even though our heroine's clothes were stained with his blood, it was still too much. In any case, she introduced herself and said that the whole situation had ruined her mood. The guy bowed down and said that his name was Veron Nestro, and he apologized for the way their first meeting had gone. Our heroine didn't understand what kind of emotional apology this was. She decided to say that the white carriages belonged to the sanctuary, so she needed to find out everything first and then act. The guy said he understood his guilt and would take it into account. Lanella Nestro also began apologizing to Lady Emilian on her brother's behalf. Our heroine thought that although they seemed to get along well, their relationship could be completely different. At that moment, Lanella Nestro hugged her brother and said that she would go with him and would visit the sanctuary another time. In this case, our heroine said that she understood her and wished them a good rest. After some time, Emilian herself was relaxing in the bathroom. The dagger the crown prince threw grazed her face, and it still hurts. It's moments like these that don't exactly make you want to be a saint. Although it contains a large amount of divine power, unfortunately, it cannot heal itself, but its recovery speed is much faster. If death is not destined for her by fate, then she will not die because her body is divine grace. Still, she wondered why she was feeling pain. Perhaps she hadn't been blessed at all? Incidentally, Veron said he smelled a monster. A person without divine power apparently couldn't recognize the monster's aura, Sershal. I wouldn't want such a situation to happen again. By the way, at that moment, the girl remembered that the prince didn't even thank her and took her favorite shawl for himself. Well, whatever, today, these hands killed a monster and saved a human life. It was dirty and creepy scary at times, but she got through it, so everything is fine. As soon as our heroine finished taking a bath, she came out and noticed Lenevin, who was waiting for hers. The girl remembered asking him to wait here. She apologized for keeping him waiting. One way or another, she handed over the documents and asked that they be transferred to the imperial palace. These are documents about the monster that wounded the prince. The emperor will ask her to investigate, so she's prepared everything in advance. Immediately after this, our heroine said that this was all she wanted to say so he could go. However, at that moment, Lenevin said she had received a letter from the palace. The girl asked what it said. The guy said that instead of the canceled banquet, they were planning to hold a celebration in her honor. Our heroine asked again. The guy said it was the emperor's gratitude for saving the crown prince. His highness, however, needed peace, so he was unlikely to get it. In any case, Lenevin began to say that if she didn't want it, he would understand and pass it on. Nevertheless, Emilian told him that everything was fine, and then asked him to tell the emperor that she would be there. The celebration is dedicated to her, but it will be held in the palace. If Lady Nestro comes, she'll bring her entire harem. But in any case, she decided that there was no way she could miss out on any fun that might be there. At that moment, she noticed a group of people standing outside her door, so she asked them to come in. The sanctuary's manager Lewin told Lady Emilian that it was time for her to prepare to leave. Our heroine told her that it was not time yet, because she would make it an hour before leaving. The event would take place in the evening after all. Nevertheless, the girl screamed in bewilderment and said that she needed to comb her hair, get dressed, and put on makeup. They already didn't have time. She instantly lifted Lady Emilian and began leading her into the room, saying they needed to hurry. Our heroine sighed heavily and said she didn't want to. However, already in the hallway, Emilian noticed how much Lewin had changed. At first, she avoided even eye contact with her, and this was already silent about starting a conversation. The girl smiled and thought, had she really become a full-fledged member of this place? The action shifts to Evening Lenevin stood opposite the window, watching the sunset. At that very moment, someone called him, so the guy was a little surprised. Realizing that it was Lady Emilian's voice, he turned around and asked if she had called him. However, his face changed surprisingly. The incredibly beautiful Emilian stood before him, telling him that he looked good today. But the guy still looked at her in bewilderment and said that she looked very good, unlike him. Emilian thanked him sheepishly. Nevertheless, the boy bowed and said he would accompany her today. As she was already walking, she said that he usually visited such places instead of her, and she was grateful to him for that. The guy said it was his duty to help her, but he asked if she was really okay. Our heroine didn't quite understand his words. Lenevin explained that he'd always assumed she tried to avoid such events. It seemed like something happened then that confused her, didn't it? Emilian paused. Lenevin had always been concerned about her behavior. She thought he was only concerned about Lady Nestro. But maybe he was just a kind soul. In any case, she apologized for making him worry, because everything was fine. Then he said he could only be happy. One way or another, our heroine told him not to think about her and to concentrate more on himself. It turned out that our heroine is very fickle. She couldn't stand these events before. However, today everything was different. At that moment, Lenevin and Emilian entered the room and were greeted. Only the one announcing who was coming did it. The rest of the crowd, however, didn't say a word, but instead looked around in silence. Emilian certainly noticed that the early hubbub of conversation had turned to silence as soon as they entered. Were they discussing sanctuary matters? After she became a saint, some aristocrats began to look at the shrine with hostility, but she acted fairly so that the shrine would receive a share. She increased the budget of the sanctuary, so some people thought I was stealing money that should have gone into their pockets. But if the sanctuary were to disappear, there would be significant losses. Regardless, our heroine invited Lenevin to sit down. The boy agreed. He then said that aristocrats usually arrive slowly. They were supposed to be among the last to enter, but they arrived quickly. Emilian also noticed that it went faster than last time, meaning there was no need to rush éloignes. At that moment, the next couple was announced. Lanella Nestro and her companion, Duke Inesis Kasian, arrived at the event. Everyone immediately started commenting on how wonderful they were, but they reacted differently to Lenevin and her. Suddenly, a stranger approached our heroine and greeted her. The guy bowed before Emilian and told her that he was always at her disposal. What was so disdainful about his greeting? Our heroine asked who it was, and Lenevin replied that he was Count Mozio's second son. In that case, Emilian turned to him again and said hello. The guy told her he'd participated in a hunting tournament. Didn't she recognize him? The girl smiled and told him that there was no time for dating. After all, he himself knew what happened. The boy nodded and said he'd heard about how she'd helped his knights too. So he was grateful for the attention she'd bestowed on his pathetic subordinates. And so that nasty appraising look and self-assured smile revealed itself. There are people who are trying in every way to hurt our heroine. However, at that moment, the guy suggested that if Emilian didn't mind, they could dance. But our heroine immediately refused. She smiled, saying that she was glad to meet him, but still wished him a good time. Mozio was perplexed and didn't even have time to say a word. But Lenevin took Emilian, and at her request, they quickly headed off for a walk somewhere. The guy wanted to catch up with her, but at that moment, he was simply blocked by Lanella Nestro and Enesis, who noticed God's grace and greeted her. The girl said, "God bless them." Soon she asked the lady if she had resolved her family problems. The girl smiled and said that everything was fine thanks to Emilian. However, she suggested that she must have been tired, so had she managed to get a good rest? Suddenly, people began to greet God's grace. They greeted her grace, asked how Lenevin was doing and how Duke Nestro was doing. When our heroes walked together, everyone avoided looking in their direction and kept their distance. However, as soon as Lanella Nestro approached them, suddenly all the people pounced on them like bees on a hive. Enesis said at this point that due to the hustle and bustle of the hunting competition, he had not been able to express his gratitude to her. He bowed to her and thanked her for saving Nella. Emilian told him not to do that. She knew for sure that Duke Cation was not against the sanctuary or that he was trying to control himself in front of his beloved. But why then does this man look at her as if she is his rival? At that moment, a perplexed Lady Nestro approached and asked her friend if he was really going to thank Lady Emilian instead of her. Our heroine had just decided she'd imagined it. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard. Emilian began to turn her head from side to side, trying to determine where it was coming from. Not understanding what was happening, our heroine felt a terrible premonition. At that moment, she raised her head and looked at the chandelier. Something was wrong with it. Perhaps now it— Literally, just as our heroine thought, the chandelier chain snapped in the blink of an eye. Everyone screamed in horror, but our heroine instantly pushed Lenevin away from her. With great difficulty, the girl dodged, but the chandelier slightly hit her. Lenevin, realizing what was happening, asked the lady in horror if she was okay. The girl turned around and said she wasn't really hurt. She wanted to say something to Lenevin next, but suddenly she felt ill. The guy ran up to her in horror and asked again how she was feeling. Emilian said everything was fine, but asked him to examine the chandelier. The guy still insisted he needed to examine her wound. The girl said that was unnecessary, and it would be better to quickly figure out if there was anything unusual. Lenevin was certainly shocked, and not a little shocked, but still said that he would be back soon. Our heroine, holding his hand, told the high priest that she had hopes for him. Meanwhile, panic broke out among the public people, who were horrified by the sight of blood. One of the men at that moment shouted, saying that he asked for the palace physician to be called. Our heroine immediately assumed that the fragments had scattered everywhere. At that moment, she noticed Halo Lestuin writhing in pain and disbelief. Could he have gotten hurt too? Approaching him, she asked to see Halo Lestuin, nearly jumped in surprise. Anyway, she used her healing magic and started helping the guy. In just a moment, his hands were perfectly clean, and there were no traces of wounds. Seeing this magic, a whole crowd of people ran to Emilian and began asking her to help them. There were many wounded, but fortunately, nothing serious. Then she would try that very thing. The girl asked everyone to calm down and not move. At that very moment, she began to use magic, but more substantial. Thanks to the mass spell, all the people's wounds were healed, and there was not a scratch on their bodies. In that case, she had settled the matter of first priority. The girl then turned to Duke Cation and asked if he was all right. The young man nodded. Overall, this was not surprising, since they were at a safe distance. Finally, Lenevin came running and told the saint that there was a strange mark where the chain had broken. It looked like the chain had been cut on purpose. He couldn't find the tool, so he decided that magic had been used and that the monster's poison had been found on many of the chandelier's crystals. Our heroine seemed to feel dizzy, not from pain. Regular poison wouldn't affect her, but the monster's venom might. Either way, it was odd. If ordinary people had been poisoned, their wounds wouldn't have healed so quickly. And besides, she hadn't noticed any signs of poisoning in anyone. The guy wanted to say that he himself didn't understand, but at that moment, all the people around him began to say in bewilderment that they hoped that everything would be okay. Our heroine clapped her hands to get their attention and asked them to be quiet. The chandelier fell right above her head, so everyone can probably guess what she's getting at. The girl screamed and angrily asked how they dared to underestimate her. Did they really despise the sanctuary so much? That is why she decided to announce in the name of Saint Emilian that from that moment on, the sanctuary would completely suspend its monster extermination activities. People started shouting in disbelief, asking what kind of nonsense this was. Were they really supposed to confront the monsters with physical force alone? However, at that moment, a man approached our heroine from the side and asked the saint to calm down. Turning around, the girl saw Marquis Mithra standing before her. He was the most powerful and influential man among all the aristocrats of the empire. He had urged her to use the commoners as bait. He assumed that Emilian was very scared because of the falling chandelier, so it was difficult to remain calm in such a situation. But she still needed to think about everything. He began to tell her about the sanctuary's main purpose, saying it wasn't funny to shut down her monster-slaying activities. Emilian said they were the ones making the joke, not her. Mithra laughed and then asked in surprise what she meant. The girl explained that the shrine's mistress is a saint, and that, as everyone knows she is the one who hears God, who brings abundance and peace to the empire. It was for their sake that she decided to suspend the sanctuary's activities. People whispered in confusion, asking what this meant. The girl said that their treatment of the god's beloved could only anger the god himself, but she did not want the god to punish them. In that case, it was she who decided to take on their punishment. What was better, to be left without the temple's support, or to be punished by heaven? Mithra, perplexed, began to ask what would happen if that happened. What would be the point of the shrine's existence then? Emilian reminded them that they weren't just killing monsters, they were just taking a short break. She then said that this would continue until the criminal who attempted to kill the saint was found. Therefore, she thinks everyone is in agreement. The man asked if she really wanted them to catch the attacker. What if it was just an accident? What if there's no criminal? Will the sanctuary never fulfill its duties again? It's funny how there's tons of evidence, and yet he still insists. Emilian wondered if the management wouldn't have noticed the chandelier was about to collapse. The idea that someone did it intentionally sounds more plausible. The man wanted to say something, but hesitated. As soon as she brought up the subject of the title's influence, he immediately fell silent. Soon, Emilian asked all people not to forget that she is the deputy of God himself, so she punishes them. All this time, there was only one guy standing on the sidelines who did not join in the discussion. This suspicious man turned out to be Lady Nestro's brother, Veron Nestro. After some time, Lewin approached Lady Emilian in bewilderment, talking about her wound. Our heroine turned around and said it was nothing, but still asked for a bandage to be brought to her so as not to stain everything around. Soon after, she sat on her bed, thinking about how everything was driving her crazy. Why was it so hard? If the chandelier had fallen on her, she would have lain unconscious for at least a month. A saint isn't so easy to kill, but she can still be wounded. She's terrified by all these thoughts. Somewhere nearby, someone is trying to take her life. Should she leave the country? At that moment, Lenevin knocked on our heroine's door. Emilian was surprised, but asked him to come in. As soon as he came in, she asked what was wrong. He said he'd brought her some bandages and had something to tell her. He apologized for disturbing her off. Anyway, he looked at her and said that she had acted recklessly today. Our heroine asked again in surprise. The guy started shouting, saying that his primary concern was her safety, so he had to protect her. He admitted that he couldn't allow her to be hurt. Even if he had to sacrifice his life, he promised her that she would never. Our heroine asked him not to say that, and then asked if he had come here just to say that she had suffered, so she needed peace. The guy started mumbling something, but the girl shoved a candy into his mouth and said that she wanted to hear him say something different. He certainly felt guilty for failing to do his duty, but if she left it like that, he wouldn't be able to sleep because of his thoughts. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and asked him if he didn't like the candy. The guy, perplexed, said he couldn't understand why she liked them. These candies were special Emilian herbal mint-flavored candies. Because of their distinctive odor, many residents of the empire disliked them. It was a pity that he didn't like the candy, but Emilian asked the high priest to sit down. Soon she asked if today's situation happened to the crown prince. How would people react? Would she just run to him? Of course not. They're so obsessed with hierarchy. Duke Cassian was the quickest to react and shielded Lady Nestro. Yet she, being in the most dangerous zone, remained unnoticed. A saint is legally superior to the duke's daughter, but he couldn't decide whom to protect, and yet no one reproached him. It was today that they saw how much the aristocrats underestimated the work of the sanctuary. Easily controllable equipment, and those who come to the rescue at the first call. Lenevin asked what if, in a dangerous situation, no one thought of this. Emilian said she limited them to show they had the right to refuse. Lenevin, nevertheless, asked, what if a higher-level monster appeared? Our heroine replied that such monsters only appear once every 100 years. From now on, There will only be low-level monsters, and even ordinary knights can handle them. Lenevin sighed and said she was right. Emilian assured him she'd make an exception if he showed up since she wasn't that strict. There was no law preventing her from doing this. She asked Lenevin if it was true. The guy said, as if in some kind of despair, that it was true. What happened to him? The action, meanwhile, takes us to Marquis Mitra, who was thinking that he had not been so furious for a long time. This devil Emilian appeared out of nowhere and became a saint and started setting conditions. Still, she's just a little thing, just a year old. What can she do on her own? Aristocrats keep submitting requests for monster extermination. How dare she look down on their society? It would be better to keep a low profile and get on with her business. Deciding that if she dared to turn up her nose, he would make her regret it several times over. Meanwhile, our heroine poured out a whole bunch of letters that were already getting on her nerves. She had no doubt that people would continue to send her requests, implying that they didn't value her. One way or another, she wondered what the criminal who dropped the chandelier on her was doing. After all, the imperial family had said they would look into the matter. At that moment, Lenevin knocked on her room door and said that he was coming in. As soon as the guy entered the room, our heroine, perplexed, asked if he hadn't been asleep. Lenevin, in a long voice, said that everything was fine. He told her that she should worry about herself first. Emilian, in turn, said how much aristocrats irritated her. They just couldn't bear to lose money. Lenevin also looked at the fire and asked if she thought the sanctuary should help those who need help. The girl looked at him thoughtfully, and the guy immediately screamed and told her that he in no way wanted to dispute her order. Now he just couldn't accept this fact yet. Nothing less could be expected from a man with innate divine powers. Nevertheless, Emilian stood her ground, insisting that one must always consider one's actions. However, apparently she didn't explain it clearly, so she asked to give her a little time, and she would try to put everything in its place. Having stopped the monster extermination after the chandelier incident, she gave many priests a vacation. They'd been working non-stop, so they deserved it. Lenevin then asked for the others. She sent the rest to the slums to deliver food and bring the sick and orphans here. The boy was surprised. Our heroine told him he was the high priest, so she asked him to think about what would happen next. He shouldn't feel guilty about the aristocracy. He mustn't forget about the common people, the people who are often hurt. Lowering his head, the boy said guiltily that he remembered all the commoners. In that case, our heroine said that she was mistaken, because he did not forget but ignored them. She was well aware of how things were going at the sanctuary. It was the aristocrats who came with their demands, not the common people who were pressuring him. Even though Emilian was injured, she still didn't want it to leave a bad mark. Sick people and orphans from the slums will come to them. The sick will be here for treatment. But why does she want to bring orphans? The guy asked in bewilderment if she really wanted to improve the protective structure. Our heroine smiled and nodded. In memory of those who sacrificed their lives, she decided to equip a small room in the sanctuary. It doesn't have an official name yet, but its purpose is to care for orphans. She advocated for all those who lost loved ones in the slums. The girl said she wanted to consider a place outside the sanctuary, maybe even build a real shelter. This shelter will house orphans until they reach adulthood. The guy asked if she meant the same as their current situations. The girl said that everything was correct. They would just legalize everything. This is directly related to taxes and other expenses. She suddenly remembered taxes. She planned to use the opportunity to completely revise tax rates throughout the empire. The guy said that His Majesty would not allow her, and the girl herself understood this perfectly well. The previous saints could not do anything, so she wanted to try. Looking at him, she said that this was perhaps the main purpose of the god who sent her here. The guy immediately screamed and said that he would try even harder and give it his all. Our heroine smiled and said that even his words would be enough for her. The action soon shifts to evening. Our heroine was sitting in the library reading a book. However, looking out the window, she noticed that night had come, so it was time to rest. Of all the places she had been, she liked the sanctuary library the most. There was a reason for this, of course, but at that moment, our heroine found what she was looking for. The shrine's library contains a great many romance books. The one she retrieved was one of them. All the saints had occupied this place. Apparently among them were those whose tastes were similar to hers. Perhaps they would even have become good friends. Incidentally, it was impossible not to notice the book's intriguing title, Love of a Monster. It's odd that with such a title, it even ended up in the sanctuary. In any case, having decided that it was fiction, she nevertheless began to read it. The story begins simply. Long ago, a monster was born in a forest. He observed people and could even reflect. He listened to voices, studied paintings, writing food, and even people's clothing. One day, a monster entered the body of a beautiful girl and came to the village, but it was difficult to get used to the human body. She tripped and fell, but then a man suddenly appeared and helped the beauty get up. Of course, they fell in love with each other at first sight, but fate decided to play a cruel joke on them. The man turned out to be a priest. If he discovered the beautiful girl's true identity, she would lose her life. The monster girl still decided to give in to her love, but lost in her dreams, she made a mistake. The sanctuary learned of the true nature of the priest's beloved. Then they told the man about her and ordered him to kill her. Because of his love, he could not watch his beloved die, and in the end, he decided to run away with her. However, they failed to deceive the sanctuary. The exiled priest died saving the monster's girlfriend. The man she loved was dying in the arms of a crying girl. And then she said, "Why am I a monster? Why am I not a person like you?" Quite unusual. A monster that thinks like a human and expresses feelings of love. Even if such creatures exist, it's unknown when they will turn to humans. However, it is right that the sanctuary judges such people. But the story is very tragic. After some time, the girl came to her office, but noticed Lenavin still sitting at the table. She put her hand on his shoulder and said that she had asked him not to overdo it last night. The guy was very scared. Nevertheless, taking the piece of paper in her hand, she asked if he had any other business. She suddenly began reading, "Count Guasin is guilty of kidnapping 21 girls. He is also accused of assaulting them. Given Count Guasin's high position, he is exempt from punishment." It's funny, but she only read one document. Looking at Lenavin, she told him he was doing a good job. The guy told her that she had entrusted this matter to him. She said that the rotten aristocrats needed to be overthrown, and that would lower taxes. Our heroine said that was correct. If they carry out their plan, His Majesty won't object. Their only opponents will be the aristocrats. Looking at Lenavin, she asked what was wrong. The guy said there were some aristocrats here, people he got along well with, and he couldn't believe they'd committed multiple crimes. It's hard to do that. Emilian placed the document on the table and asked if he was scared. Lenavin said he was. This time the punishment would be much more severe. Our heroine told him that she knew this well, but if he was afraid to punish sinners, was he a servant of God? He needs to think about those who became victims because of criminals. If it's for the good of those who suffered, then he shouldn't feel guilty for sending these freaks to the very depths of hell. She asked him to think carefully and sort out his thoughts. Would it be wise to continue turning a blind eye to everything as before? Looking at his gaze, she decided that she had probably worried for nothing. Either way, she was glad they understood each other. Stroking his head, Emilian said that it was hard to understand if there was no one nearby who could help him get on the right path. She again asked him not to blame himself because he was a great guy, and she would take all these documents to the emperor herself. The next day, she announced the punishment of sinful aristocrats and a tax reduction. All the aristocrats, led by Duke Nestro, supported this idea. The emperor also agreed to approve the punishment only after the crime was confirmed. The proceedings were postponed for 2 days. Waking up, Emilian thought they'd successfully overcome the first critical moment. Why was it so noisy outside? She decided to go out and check, but seeing herself in the mirror, she decided that it was not worth doing it looking like that. The girl began to tidy herself up, and at that very moment, someone entered her room. It was Lewin's surprise to see Lady Emilian already awake. Emilian asked why there was so much noise so early in the morning. The woman said the criminal who attempted to kill her had been caught. Our heroine was very happy to hear this. Nevertheless, Lewin, perplexed, began to ask why she had been so stupid. At first glance, she seemed like an ordinary lady, but she turned out to be a stupid child. Our heroine asked again, and Lewin decided she needed to take a look. She'd help her get dressed. After some time, she descended, and the priests greeted God's grace. The girl said that the Lord's blessing would touch them, and soon after that, she said that they could stand up. Soon the sinner, Jessie Fatra, was shown. She was caught last night for the attempted murder of a saint. Is this a criminal? In any case, Emilian said they did a great job, but why is she like that? The guy said she resisted. I see His Majesty assumed she wanted such an investigation. The proposed punishment was confiscation of property and noble titles. In any case, our heroine approached her and asked her to stand peacefully, and she would heal her. The saint didn't even have time to touch her, but at that moment, she already began to scream incredibly loudly. Emilian understood that the girl was in a panic, so she should hurry. She immediately began to use her magic. After some time, the girl's screams stopped and her tears stopped flowing. She fell to the ground, and our heroine looked at her and asked if she was okay. The girl began to cry again, asking the saint for help because her parents. Turning around, our heroine asked Lenevin to take the sinner inside, and she would personally interrogate her. The girl told everyone that she would go on her own, so the knights could go. Unexpectedly, a guy soon approached our heroine and greeted her with God's grace. Turning around, she saw Nisus, who was addressing her and asking her to give him a little time. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked what had happened to his clothes. The boy replied that he had fought a monster a few days earlier. The girl asked why his subordinates weren't keeping an eye on this. The guy replied that the situation had gotten worse recently, so it wasn't the time to dwell on such trivial matters. Our heroine was surprised that something had happened in the Cajun duchy. At that moment, the young man explained that that wasn't the reason for his visit. Make them pay for the sins the aristocrats committed. This is what Emilian asked His Majesty for. Our heroine was surprised that he came because of this, but said that he was well informed. Enisus suddenly said that, until now, he hadn't known about his father's sins. He was deeply ashamed that even after receiving the title, he hadn't realized it. The previous duke was as arrogant an aristocrat as the rest. He abused his power, so it's no surprise his son didn't know about it. However, this crime is nothing compared to other aristocrats. She is even surprised that the duke considered abuse of power a sin. Anyway, the guy said that he came to express his gratitude for her uncovering the crimes of the previous duke and assigning punishments. Our heroine, surprised, asked if she was his enemy, since she had caught his father in a crime. The boy replied that, although he thought he was a good person, all sins were punished. Emilian thought the same about him. Enisus wasn't a bad man at all, and the duchy had begun to flourish after he came to power. However, the guy said that he wanted to apologize to Lady Emilian for his father. Our heroine told him he shouldn't do it because it was pointless. Enisus still stood his ground, insisting he had to do it. He dropped to one knee and asked Lady Emilian for forgiveness for allowing her to get hurt that day. He, as a knight who failed to protect her, must suffer the same punishment, so he is ready to do whatever she says. According to the Empire's laws, he was guilty. She, of course, doesn't like that. No one accepts the sanctuary, but she didn't plan all this to punish Duke Cassian. Besides, despite his title, he sincerely apologized, so she decided to do it differently. She asked if this situation happened again, would he save her? However, the guy suddenly fell silent. Our heroine asked why he wasn't answering, or was he not being sincere when he apologized? Enisus replied that he truly felt guilty towards her, so he swears on the honor of his family. He apologized for not being able to say with certainty that his choices in the future would be the same as they were now. Emilian suddenly laughed and said she was just trying to make a joke. She hadn't meant to punish him, even though his actions would be considered wrong by the laws of this country. She fully understands his intentions to protect someone dear to him. Even though she was in the middle of danger, her rescue was reasonable, but if she continued talking about it, she would seem grumpy. That's why she decided to sum it up. Feelings can't always lead down a rational path. But turning a blind eye to this, she said that, considering that he came to her to apologize, she would turn a blind eye to everything. Nevertheless, she asked him to stand up and ask him a question. The guy said she could do it. Our heroine asked him what he liked about Lady Lanella. This was a great chance to hear why he fell in love with her. Even in novels, she loved the moments when a man spoke of his feelings. Yet the guy stood rooted to the spot. He asked himself in horror what it was about Lady Lanella that he liked. Our heroine almost thought that he wanted to ask if love needed a reason. Either way, judging by his reaction, he genuinely didn't know the reason. Well, that was quite an unexpected reaction. Enisus then said he couldn't answer that question. After a while, our heroine finished washing herself. She was worried about Duke Cassian's condition, as he had lingered and left in a hurry. At that moment, a guy approached our heroine and said he'd take the used towel. Emilian was grateful. The guy smiled sheepishly and said he should be thanking her. She then asked if he knew where Lenevin was. The boy said he saw the high priest heading toward the guest room at the end of the hallway. She immediately turned around and told him he could go. Already standing in front of the door, she was thinking about getting this matter sorted out. Suddenly, she heard a noise inside the room. Opening the door, she noticed the high priest trying to calm Jessie Fotra. The girl screamed in horror and told them all to get away from her, otherwise she would lose control of herself. Nevertheless, the guy finally noticed our heroine and was happy about it. Emilian asked what was going on. The guy said that he brought the girl tea, and she suddenly took out a knife hidden in her leg. Looking at the bottle in her hand, our heroine realized it was a scented sleeping pill. Did she really want to escape from here with it? Our heroine decided that no one had examined her for such objects. They just wanted to beat up a person instead of doing their job. Lenevin confirmed her words, saying she was brought here immediately. Emilian realized she hadn't had any contact with anyone other than the knights. Looking at Jessie Fotra threatening her, our heroine decided that this could even be to their advantage. One way or another, she asked her to calm down, because if she had intended to do something to her, she would not have sent her to this room. However, she disobeyed this request and decided that she was a commando, so she started waving the knife. But suddenly, her dagger fell out of her hand and flew towards our heroine. Soon, Emilian crouched down and picked up the blade, taking it in her hands. Jessie Fotra was incredibly frightened. Looking at the angry Emilian, the girl, terrified, begged him to save her. She promised not to do it again. Holding the knife in her hand, our heroine pondered. What should she do in this situation? Emilian began to ostentatiously swing her blade. Jessie Fotra began to scream in horror, but our heroine suddenly turned to her and asked her to calm down. She was absolutely not going to stab her. Leaning toward her, she simply asked why she was acting like this. She hadn't done it, so why had she come to the sanctuary? The girl, perplexed, said it was her. Our heroine said it was funny, because the person who took it with him was telling her this. It would be fine if she admitted her guilt and sat quietly, but only someone who is not guilty can act up like that, so it's unconvincing. Our heroine asked her why she was a criminal, and so followed the answer. Emilian asked how she pulled it all off. Looking at her, she asked her to tell what tools she used, and if she used magic, she told her to show it here and now. It is so strange that a criminal who admits to her sin cannot explain how she committed it. The answer is obvious. It's all because she is not the person she is looking for. Apparently, the Imperial Guard's investigation had yielded no results, and as soon as a man was caught red-handed, they decided to seize the opportunity. Although it was terrible that she was even beaten on top of all this, our heroine wanted to understand who wanted to pin the blame on her. Jessie Fotra suddenly felt a thought. She should say she did it, but if they found out it was a lie, the spotlight would turn on him. Realizing the nightmare awaiting her, the girl screamed again and said it was her. She had to hide it at any cost. She said she'd managed to forget about that day, but she really did. She needed to convince the saint, otherwise her parents were in danger. Emilian walked up to Jessie Fotra and told her to listen to what she was about to say. She can't fool her with such terrible acting. She's absolutely certain it wasn't her doing. Our heroine dared to suggest that she was only worried about her family. Seeing no reaction, Emilian turned to Lenevin and asked him to immediately send a man to the lands of Baron Fotra. She ordered that her parents be brought to the sanctuary, and they would protect them. And she also needed to convey that all this was for the sake of their daughter. Jessie Fotra, perplexed, asked what she was doing, and our heroine calmly replied that she would help her get out of this situation. She would help, right? The girl began to cry and asked the saint if she could really save her family. Our heroine took her hand and said that she would do everything in her power. Soon after, the girl started crying even more, so Emilian hugged her and began to calm her down. Some time later, Lenevin came to our heroine, again knocking on her door. The girl asked him to come in. The guy apologized, saying that he heard that Lady Jessie Fotra was with her now. Our heroine pointed to the girl and said that she was there but not a criminal, but her guest. She couldn't leave her in dirty clothes. The young man was naturally surprised. Nevertheless, he immediately said that he had sent priests and a carriage to Baron Fotra's estate. Emilian said that was good, and then added that they were just about to talk, so she invited him to sit down. Our heroine soon took out a jar of her candies and offered to take one Jessie Fotra. The girl happily took one candy into her mouth, just like Mrs. Emilian. However, soon, our heroine's face showed delight, but Jessie's face resembled that she was in incredible horror. Soon she even cringed, not understanding what this delicious thing was. Was it really edible? Noticing that the girl had swallowed the candy whole, our heroine said in bewilderment that this was not allowed. Jessie Fotra apologized, saying she had a very strong taste. Emilian sighed and said she hadn't yet found anyone who appreciated these candies. In any case, she said that wasn't the most important thing right now. Looking at the girl, she asked her to tell everything in order, but lying was forbidden. Jessie Fotra bowed her head and said she understood. She immediately began to talk about how her family had been on the brink of collapse lately. Her uncle, the Marquis of Cerrone, took away their mine, which was their only source of income, and attributed his debts to them. However, a week before the banquet, a man came to her and offered her a large sum of money, telling her to do as she was told. A chandelier will fall on the saint's head. After a few days of investigation, she will have to convince everyone that she did it. Then the money will be hers. But if something went wrong and she jeopardized his position, her family would be in danger. Emilian assumed she knew nothing at all about the criminal. The girl sighed and said that was true. Lenovan asked if she remembered any distinguishing features. The girl said that when he pulled out the bag, she noticed a black mark on the inside of his wrist. 2 snakes that had bitten the eagle's wings. Our heroine instantly turned to Lenovan in horror, and the guy told her that she was right. It was an anti-divine sect. The anti-divine sect is a community of dark magicians who commit atrocities in secret and do not recognize the sanctuary. They always operate covertly, so almost nothing is known about them. Emilian never imagined they were involved in this. The girl told Jessie that she would live with her family in the sanctuary for now, because if cultists were involved, it would be better to stay here. The girl agreed. Either way, Emilian wasn't guaranteed a comfortable stay. Since she arrived here as a criminal, she would be the target of disapproving glances. Jessie Fotra replied that compared to what she had been through, the terrible thoughts that had consumed her, it meant nothing. In any case, she bowed and thanked them for giving her a chance. No matter what happened, she would be on Emilian's side. Our heroine said that if she follows the good path, then soon others will also open up to her. Nevertheless, Jessie Fotra said that while she was here, she would try to help. Emilian said she had her hopes up. At that moment, our heroine was called over by Lenovan, who was sitting next to her and wanted to say something. The guy said that she could also address him freely and informally, and what's more, he wanted her to do so. Emilian asked if he meant switching to informal address. He said he'd feel more comfortable that way. Our heroine smiled and told Lenovan that she understood him and would address him informally. Our heroine hoped that the rest of the night would pass peacefully, but, looking at Mr. Nestro, who came to her in the middle of the night, she asked what he wanted. Emilian laughed and said that Lady Nestro does that too, so maybe it runs in the family, showing up unannounced. The guy in turn told her he hadn't intended to run into her. Our heroine didn't quite understand these words. He soon said that he used invisibility magic, but she still saw him. Emilian looked at him suspiciously and said that everything was correct. She could see him perfectly well. Nevertheless, the boy asked not to be misunderstood. He didn't come here with bad intentions. Emilian said she didn't know why he was there, but that didn't change the fact that he had entered her office without permission. Anyway, she asked what he meant, and the guy turned around and said it was getting stronger. He was talking about the smell. Soon he approached the saint, and taking her by the neck, said that the reason for this was in Harem. The girl pulled his hand away, wondering how he dared touch her. She had lifted the ban on killing monsters. Verone asked again, surprised, and then said he remembered. Couldn't that be what he meant? In any case, he turned to the saint again. Looking at Emilian, the guy asked if she wanted to make a deal with him. Our heroine, perplexed, asked what kind of deal they were talking about, to which Verone replied that he didn't want her to get close to his sister. A rather strange condition, Emilian told him. It was quite problematic, since she was even responsible for her security. She was worried about her. The guy replied that he would handle it himself, so she didn't need to worry about the Nestro family's problems. Looking at Emilian, he said that he, the heir of the Nestro family, had returned. Our heroine decided he was serious. In any case, she asked what the terms of the deal were. Soon after, our heroine took his hand and kissed it. Verone certainly didn't expect that. Then Emilian looked up and asked, what if she accepted his terms? How would he repay her for it? The boy brought his saintly hand kissed by the saint to his lips and said that he would protect her. If she is in danger, she can count on him, an experienced mage who possesses high-level techniques. Our heroine was sure that situations like the one with the chandelier would happen again in the future, so keeping her distance from Lady Nestro and getting her brother's protection was a good deal. That's why Emilian said she agreed. Soon the guy approached her and told her about his sister. Our heroine asked what she should do, to which he replied that she should not touch her, but they could see each other. Before leaving, he told her that if she needed anything, she could call him. Moreover, he was already waiting for the moment when she would need him. The action shifts to the next day. Jessie Fotra, the maid, and Lenevin come to Lady Emilian and begin telling her it's time to wake up. With great reluctance, our heroine raised her head and said she heard them. However, due to the situation, she had no time to sleep at all that night. In any case, even in this state, she needed to get up. Finally getting out of bed, she began reaching for a glass of water. As she started drinking the water, she thought about how important today was. Suddenly, her brain froze. The water was full of ice. Lenevin put a scarf on Emilian, and she commented in surprise about the scent emanating from him. He said he'd sprayed him with Tito's, which she liked. Our heroine smiled and said that it was true she liked him. It was nice that he remembered such a small detail. To prevent anyone from harming such kind people, she had to win. After some time, the action takes us to the hall, where the meeting was to take place. Mithra soon noticed Saint Emilian. He was fed up with her threats at the previous banquet. However, she also stripped many aristocrats of their titles, which means he underestimated her. Even today, this scoundrel decided to play a game with them. The Marquis's face was stained. At that moment, our heroine was sitting on a chair, and people were greeting God's grace. Just looking at Emilian, the man began to get angry at the arrogance of this girl. Getting up from his chair, he decided he needed to calm down. This was the last day she would be so cocky. However, at this moment, our heroine thanked people for taking the time to come today. Mithra looked at her thinking that she was a threat to peace within the empire, so he had to get rid of her. He had just the right thing for it. There was a powerful poison on his hands that would have affected even a saint, a wonderful find for such a vile man. He already felt how the temple would lose God's favorite without even understanding how it happened, and he would no longer lose precious savings. As soon as Lenevin brought the holy tea, the man inside rejoiced and shouted for her to drink it quickly. Come on, Emilian, drink it. Suddenly, our heroine wiped the glass in bewilderment and asked what the poison was doing here. People began to scream in horror and ask if the high priest really wanted to poison the saint. The guy immediately started shouting back, telling Lady Emilian that it wasn't him because he wouldn't do anything. Our heroine asked him to calm down and told him that she knew it wasn't his doing. She turned her gaze to the hall and assumed that among them, there were those who had not come to their senses and still longed for her death. At this point, Mithra turned to Lady Emilian in surprise, asking if she really suspected her own guests. He pointed out to her that they were in a sanctuary, and the tea was brewed by her people, and only priests could have conceived such a thing. People immediately decided he was right. The priest wanted to kill the saint. Of course, that made sense. This tea is made from the leaves of a plant that grows in their garden. I most likely got into trouble while preparing or serving the tea. Of course, the temple servants would never do such a thing. Could it be that someone here bribed a man in the same way that Jessie was bribed? However, at that moment, Halo Lastuin asked everyone to calm down. He decided that the first priority was to make sure Lady Emilian was okay. Our heroine smiled and said she was fine. Fortunately, she was recovering quickly. Halo Lastuin said that this was good news, in which case he suggested continuing their meeting. He also added that the meeting needed to be held as quickly as possible so that they had time to find the criminal hiding among these people. Our heroine couldn't understand where his enthusiasm was coming from, and Mithra, surprised, asked the thinker what he was talking about. Could there really be a criminal among them? The boy said it was obvious. However, the man said no one had approached the saint, so how could he be so sure of that? He explained that he had never heard anyone from the sanctuary complain about the saint. In any case, this was simply his assumption. Mithra immediately snorted and said there was no evidence. This was definitely the work of someone from the sanctuary. However, Halo Lastion added that if someone mixed the poison without going near the tea, they all become suspects. Mithra instantly tensed up. People asked the guy what kind of jokes he was making, since now was not the right time. Halo! Lestuin laughed and said he wasn't joking. In any case, the final decision would be Lady Emilian's, so he apologized and asked her to continue. Emilian noticed Marquis Mithra had a strange expression on his face, and Halo seemed to know something. Either way, she decided to get down to business. She decided to complete the work she had begun. As stated at the previous imperial meeting, she had no intention of changing her position. She ordered that taxes be reduced to the amount she specified, and that shelters would appear in every territory in the near future. Emilian said that if anyone was against it, they should speak up now. Of course, the first one who didn't mind was Mithra, who, perplexed, asked them to wait. Suddenly, the entire hall began to shake. Everyone screamed in confusion. What was going on? Our heroine couldn't figure out if it was an earthquake. At that moment, Lenevin told her to look out the window. The girl ran to the window, and to her horror, she discovered a monster outside the window. People began shouting in confusion and asking how the monster could have ended up in the sanctuary. The girl told everyone to calm down. Our heroine glanced at Lenevin and asked how many there were. The guy replied that there were about 10. In this case, the girl ordered to go with other priests outside the sanctuary and help the residents evacuate as quickly as possible. The guy said that he would stay here, but Emilian assured him that if the monsters escaped, there would be even more problems, so the ordinary people needed to be evacuated. Although Lenevin was not particularly happy about this, he still turned around and ran to carry out the order. At that moment, Marquis Mithra slammed the table and asked in bewilderment if she really wasn't going to catch these monsters. Why was she standing there? Our heroine asked in surprise if he really wanted her to help. The man told her not to do him a favor, as destroying monsters was her job. Everyone took up the Marquis's words and began begging her to destroy the monsters quickly. If not her, then who would? After a while, our heroine asked Jessie if she'd memorized the personal information of all the guests. She wanted to know the names of the mages and knights. Soon she asked for attention, and then she asked those whose names would be called to come forward. People asked what all this was about, and the girl said they didn't have the people to deal with all the monsters. Many of the priests were away. That is why she asked for help from those who can use force and go out with her to destroy the monsters. A whole bunch of people started saying that it was dangerous, so they couldn't do it. Our heroine said that it was all true. The monsters are so huge that they can swallow a person alive. To avoid being eaten, they must kill them. Everyone is scared. She understands this perfectly well. Even she would like to hide from all this. However, she again reminded that she, the saint of all living beings, therefore orders everyone to unite. At that moment, Enesis came out and said that these monsters were not low level, so all they could do was distract them and deal a few blows. Our heroine said that would be enough for her. She would personally take charge of their extermination. Enesis agreed, and so he soon turned to the knights, asking why the hell they were standing there. He shouted and ordered him to go forward, knights of the Vesaloyal Empire and mages. For the sake of peace in their empire, they must obey the saint's command. Even though the boys were seriously scared, they still shouted proudly and said that they understood. Our heroine thanked Anicius, saying that thanks to him, they were able to restrain themselves. The guy apologized for interfering without permission. Either way, he wasn't sure they could help her with so many people. However, the girl asked him not to worry, because she would protect everyone and send them home. The boy looked at the saint and thought that if she was nearby, then he might not worry too much. But for some reason, he felt uneasy. After some time, all the mages were ordered to attack using their skills. The knights who were supposed to go forward under the leadership of Enesis were not left without tasks either. The guy shouted for people to attack the monster and then retreated shortly after the attack. Once everything was done according to plan, Enesis turned around and told the saint that it was time to act. At that very moment, an explosion occurred, and immediately splashes of the monster's blood flew in different directions. As she headed toward the next monster, our heroine suddenly wondered, had the news reached the palace? She only hoped they'd send reinforcements in time. As soon as reinforcements arrived, they had to evacuate everyone. While killing another monster, the girl said that together, they would defeat all these creatures faster. At that moment, she heard strange screams from people behind her, saying that this huge freak was quite strange. Shortly after these words, a huge splash occurred. The monster scattered in all directions. As a result, most of the buildings came under attack from the giant, and after some time, a whole bunch of buildings were covered with unknown clots. Soon people noticed that because of these monsters, the walls outside began to collapse. After some time, the giants reached the civilian population and began to frighten them. The magicians and priests present in the city asked all people to calm down. Our heroine wasn't happy about the change in their plans. She had to deal with the monster that had just gotten out. At that moment, Emilian noticed a child in front of her who was running and crying, saying something about his mother. Soon after, the boy tripped and fell to the ground with a crash. Emilian ran towards him, thinking that he needed to be taken to a safe place as soon as possible. Soon after, she noticed the Marquis running away from the monster. The guy screamed and told the monster to get away from him. He didn't want to die so stupidly. However, at that moment, he discovered his so-called salvation in the form of a little boy. The man ran up to the boy, then grabbed him and threw him towards the monster. Our heroine couldn't allow this to happen, so she immediately made a dash and fortunately managed to save the child. However, the trajectory of movement did not change, and she still ran into the monster. Almost immediately, Duke Anessis came running to her aid and killed the monster with a swing of his blade. Once the monster was dealt with, the guy asked Lady Emilian if she was okay. However, our heroine sat and simply remained silent, showing no signs of involvement in the conversation. Hugging the child, the girl wondered in horror. How could this freak throw a small child at a monster? He advocated using commoners as bait and always tried to survive alone. She couldn't even believe how much shamelessness there was in him, and it drove her crazy. At that very moment, a huge explosion occurred as Emilian began to lose control. Halo Lastuin looked at what was happening in horror and said that this was a force that only the first saint could awaken. This force was God's punishment. Seeing this, Lenevin was perplexed. All the monsters around disappeared in the blink of an eye, as if they had never been there. Our heroine looked at the girl in bewilderment and asked if she was okay. With tears in his eyes, the child said that everything was fine. And at that moment, Anesis started running towards Emilian. The guy asked her in surprise how she was feeling. The girl said everything was fine, but asked him to take care of the girl. She also asked to be taken to. At this moment, our heroine was unable to finish her sentence. Her head began to spin, and her balance began to slip. Soon she fell unconscious to the ground. Our heroine assumed she'd lost too much blood. That night, the action takes us to Emilian's room. The girl finally woke up, thinking about how she had barely come to her senses. Could it really be night already? Then, looking at her hands, she guessed that people from the sanctuary were tending to her. Everything hurt, but apparently, it was because her hand was bandaged. Yet at that moment, she felt a strange presence. Who was standing outside her door right now? Starting to get out of bed, our heroine asked in surprise if it was really Mr. Nestro. The guy was surprised that he was recognized right away, but he still went inside asking Emilian how she was feeling. Our heroine, in turn, said she was surprised he'd even consider such a thing. He replied that he'd arrived as soon as he'd received the news. If she had called him, as they had agreed, he would have appeared much earlier. Emilian remembered him saying he'd protect her, and she also remembered him talking about the smell getting stronger. Did he really know about the monster's arrival? Or what if this guy is the culprit of everything that happened during the day? However, she decided that such a person wouldn't rush to help. Emilian said they had sorted things out, so she would take the chance another time. Verone nodded his head, but then said that he restored everything that was destroyed with the help of magic. The priests checked everything. There were no traces of the monsters left. He also said he'd heard that Emilian had used God's punishment. The guy said that because of this, not even the bodies of the monsters remained, because everything was burned to the ground. Our heroine didn't understand what he was talking about. Had her sudden, all-consuming anger really erupted in the form of holy power? In any case, Emilian thanked Verone for his help. She would learn more from the high priest. At that moment, Verone Nestro mentioned that his sister had come here. Lady Emilian asked again. The boy explained that the high priest had sent her back and said that she needed peace. Emilian was surprised he did this, considering he was so crazy about her. She smiled and asked how Lady Nestro could come here in such a situation. Even though she's against her, she still refrained from repaying her for her help. I wonder, though, what her goals are. At this moment, Lady Nestro's brother looked at Lady Emilian and asked if she liked Lanella. Our heroine smiled sweetly at him and asked who could possibly dislike her. The guy sighed heavily and then said that Lanella was a very sweet and kind person, and it couldn't be otherwise. Our heroine said that if it weren't for her, then who else in the Empire could we talk about? However, Veron said at that moment that he would go. After all, his parents were already worried. Our heroine was surprised. The Duke and Duchess? He was really returning to the estate at such a time? The boy bowed down and said that this was so, because he did not want to worry his parents. It was quite unexpected. However, it does mean that he apparently has a very caring attitude towards his parents. Unlike his sister, this man is even more mysterious. In any case, the commotion is finally over. The action takes place the next day. Our heroine said that everyone had done a great job, but she hadn't expected this. She asked if everyone had really agreed with her opinion so easily. The boys said yes, even the Marquise, who had been openly displeased. Lenevin explained that everyone was enchanted. Halo Lastuen couldn't have imagined that he would live at the same time as a saint who could use God's punishment. Emilian asked if God's punishment really helped quickly destroy a target. Halo Lastuen told her that the record said exactly that. In any case, he didn't know the details, but still only the first saint could use this power. Our heroine knew she'd have to practice to use it again. In any case, she understood why everyone was hiding their tails between their legs. However, after this, the girl looked at Halo Lastuen and asked if he wanted to tell her something. The boy said that in truth, he was also involved in the incident with the chandelier falling. According to the high priest, traces of poison were found on the shards. Halo Lastuen said that to prevent the victims from developing severe symptoms of poisoning, he immediately found out what kind of poison it was, but it turned out this poison was very unusual. Our heroine asked in surprise what it meant. The guy said that this poison is capable of attracting nearby divine power. Our heroine was in incredible shock. Could this really be a poison that reacts to divine power? Halo Lastuen continued speaking. Magic was used in the manufacturing process, so the state of the substance has no effect. In other words, under the right conditions, the poison can spread, even while in a liquid state. As soon as a person who possesses divine power enters the danger zone, he is immediately exposed to the poison. Lenevin suddenly turned to the thinker and said that he had no symptoms of poisoning, and his body was not recovering so quickly. Halo Lastuen didn't know how to say it more gently, but he decided to say that this was all because Lady Emilian's power was much greater than his. Our heroine asked if that was really why the poison had affected her primarily. The guy replied that, judging by his data, that was the case. The girl immediately said that this was very interesting, and if he personally decided to talk about it, then he also believed that the same poison was used at the meeting yesterday. The guy nodded. Our heroine assumed there was no need to even add poison to her cup. All that was needed was to time the moment when she would start drinking tea and soon say that poison had been added. Halo Lastuen said it was all true and that she was absolutely right. They needed to find the bottle to prove it. Lenevin told our heroine that they hadn't been able to search anyone yesterday. Emilian replied that if the criminal had taken her and thrown her away, there was nothing they could do. The guy nevertheless assumed that if he got rid of the evidence when everyone was busy exterminating monsters, then he would try to search the area. At that moment, Lenevin's words were interrupted as a joyful girl who had been rescued earlier ran into the room. Our heroine immediately recognized her, and the girl in turn joyfully spoke of how she had met a real saint. Jessie Fotra picked her up and told her it was rude, then apologized. She was being cranky, that's why she brought her. As the girl said she wanted to hand something over to our heroine, Emilian asked in surprise if it was for her. The girl screamed and said that she found it yesterday, and it seemed to be something very expensive. Holding out a bottle that looked too much like a container for poison, the girl said that she was giving it to Emilian. Ultimately, thanks to this, the Marquis of Mithra was sentenced to death after a trial conducted personally by the Emperor. It was revealed that the poison belonged to the Marquise. The Emperor found the Marquis guilty of attempting to assassinate the saint, and the incident with the chandelier was also attributed to him. Of course, he desperately denied all these words. He said he swore he was not to blame for what happened, but the Emperor didn't even listen to him because he wanted to get it over with. The wretched Marquis certainly got what he deserved because he chose an unfortunate time. At that moment, the emperor asked the saint if she was satisfied. In any case, if this continued chaos would descend upon the empire. This was a very real threat, so our heroine would do well to be careful. She hoped that there would be no incidents in the near future, because she needed to train her body. At the moment, she has divine power, physical abilities, and divine punishment. It turns out that with divine power comes a lot of physical power. That time, our heroine fell not because of blood loss, but because she had used up all her body's resources using divine punishment. If she hones her combat skills and swordsmanship, she'll be better able to resist the anti-divine sect. She was trained by a swordsman. The guy told her she had excellent basic skills. All she had to do was breathe properly. Anyway, that was all for today. Taking back his sword, he said she had done a great job. At that moment, the girl our heroine had saved was sitting on the ground and laughing next to the dog. Our heroine called out to Chen in surprise. Chung Ina was the girl who brought the bottle of poison. They couldn't find her family, so for now she's living in the shrine. Finding herself in an unfamiliar place would have been scary even for an adult, but Chung quickly adapted to life in the sanctuary. Emilian might even say it was too fast, so she'd already caused quite a bit of trouble. The girl asked where the dog had come from. The girl said the dog was standing at the entrance to the sanctuary. However, she asked to look at its beautiful fur. Our heroine assumed he had an owner. Cheng in turn said she thought he was completely alone like her. Shouldn't he be here? Emilian stroked the girl's head and said she wasn't mad at her. Incidentally, she couldn't understand why the girl was speaking so sadly. And then she asked if he had bitten Chung Ina. Happily said that he was very kind and they had played with him. At that moment, the girl called the swordsmanship teacher and asked him to call Jessie because the girl needed to change her clothes. Our heroine also became thoughtful. She asked the girl if Jessie or anyone else had been with her. The girl said they had gone to decorate the garden and some had seen off the priests. At that point, our heroine assumed everyone was busy preparing for the goddess festival. She then asked where Cheng's friends were. Did she want to play with them? As soon as the girl heard this question, she lowered her head in embarrassment and thought for a long time. Our heroine was very surprised. Why wasn't she answering? Was she being bullied? At that moment, the dog stood nearby, barking joyfully. Soon the dog began circling the girls and barking even louder. Emilian assumed he wanted to play with them. Sitting down next to him, our heroine stroked him, saying that he was a very friendly and good boy. The dog was only happy about this affection, so he lay down on his belly and asked to be petted. Chung Ina did just that with joy, as she couldn't pass by such a cutie. Then the girl asked the saint to pet him too. Our heroine said she would pet him now. Just after touching him, she commented in bewilderment on how soft his fur was. However, as she continued to pet this cute little dog, the girl realized that he was cute and clean. At that moment, the screams of Jessie Fatra began to be heard running and calling for Lady Emilian. Coming closer, she said that she had come for Chung En, but she couldn't help but be surprised that there really was a dog there. The girl with tears in her eyes asked if she would really return alone. Our heroine told her that she needed to change and eat. As hard as it was to say goodbye, the girl waved to the dog one last time, saying that they would see each other again soon. Our heroine then told the dog how cute their Chung was. She wanted to play some more, but she resisted. Anyway, she petted the dog again, saying that he was still a cutie, but his family was probably worried about him. Emilian suggested that they look for his family together, but at that very moment, the dog started running away. Our heroine, of course, began to follow him. The dog eventually ran off into the garden. The dog happily ran away from her, but at some point he noticed Emilian and instantly turned around, running towards her. The dog barked happily and licked Emilian's face, who laughed and asked him to stop. At that moment, Prince Casadora Macron loomed over her, asking in bewilderment what they were doing there. Our heroine, seeing the prince's face, was incredibly frightened. This was the last straw. She greeted His Highness sheepishly. She hoped he didn't think the saint had gone crazy and completely forgotten all the rules. However, at that moment, the guy grabbed the dog as it seemed at first glance and threw it out. Our heroine jumped up in horror and asked what he was doing. Casadora began to say that not only had he infiltrated the sanctuary, but he had also tried to seduce the saint. Looking at the boy, he ordered him to get up. Emilian wondered in disbelief. Had the dog really turned into a human before her very eyes? The guy immediately smiled sweetly and began to apologize for his rudeness. Nevertheless, our heroine was very angry. That sweet, charming girl actually turned out to be a huge lout. Nevertheless, the guy said he was very honored to meet her. His name is Unterven. Emilian was shocked that he'd already forgotten everything. In any case, she introduced herself, saying she was the sanctuary's mistress and pleased to meet him. However, she looked at him and said that it was the first time she had heard of anyone from Turvan County being able to turn into an animal. Casadora Macron told the girl that Unterven is a beast man. He is a half-breed. That's why he can transform from human to animal and vice versa. As she knows, blood mixing is considered a very sensitive issue. That's why few people know about it. But he still trusts her, so he decided to explain everything. It turns out, he has an extremely unique build. Anyway, she said she understood how he was transforming, but she didn't hear the reason for his visit to the sanctuary. The guy said that the crown prince came to find him, but he could also explain his animal appearance. He justified it by saying he just wanted to have fun while smiling sweetly. Our heroine forced a smile, thinking about how annoying he was. The boy said that when he saw a girl at the entrance to the sanctuary, he decided to have some fun with her. Everyone knows how much children adore dogs. And yet it was true, Chung Anna was very happy. It would have been even better if he hadn't attacked her like that. In any case, he said that he wanted to meet her, since he had not had the opportunity before. He was curious to get to know her personally. Given the rumors circulating, Emilian asked if that was all he wanted to know. The guy smiled and said that was all. Our heroine turned to Unterven and said whether she considered this kind of behavior impolite or whether she had the wrong sources. The boy nodded and said she had been trained properly. If she wanted to punish him, he'd agree to anything. Was Emilian surprised by his frivolity? Or does he think she won't dare do anything to him? If he's truly heard of her, he knows she's not as kind as the previous saints. What's with this strange certainty? The crown prince suddenly said that while she was thinking he would get to the reason for his visit, Emilian, surprised, asked if he hadn't come for him. The guy said that he was just drawn into his adventure. But holding out the box, he said that this was the real reason. He opened it, and our heroine looked at it in surprise and asked what it was. Casadora Macron said he'd taken her handkerchief at a hunting tournament. Unfortunately, her scarf was badly damaged, so it couldn't be returned in that condition, which means he's giving a new one. He then spoke of the treatment he had received at the sanctuary. He wanted to express his sincere gratitude. Our heroine smiled and told him it wasn't worth it. Still, it was unexpected. At what point did the crown prince become so attentive? In any case, she said she'd be even happier if he'd let her know in advance about his visits. The guy said insisted on coming today. In that case, the girl decided they were very close. Incidentally, the county of Turvien supports the crown prince. Unterven suddenly asked His Highness if he had really decided to push everything onto him. He then asked who had been sitting there, all dressed up, holding a box, when shutting his friend's mouth, the guy apologized again for their unexpected visit. And he would take care of punishing this fool, so she need not worry. Finally, he turned around and said that they would pass, but would still see each other at the goddess festival. Emilian smiled and wished them a safe journey. She didn't want to see that liar from Turvan again anyway. The action takes us to Unterven, who burst into the building and told the respected king that he had returned. The man asked him not to say that, because if anyone heard him, they would misunderstand. The boy said he knew this room was under protective magic. Unterven smiled and asked if he wasn't interested in anything. The man replied that he was acting in a way that even made him curious. The guy in the tie and shirt looked at and asked who this saint really was. The goddess festival. This is a celebration where people thank the goddess, who breathed life into the earth and heavens, and ask for her blessings. This festival is held every 5 years and lasts a whole week. During this period, even conflicting countries are expected to reach a peace agreement. Many consider this festival to be very significant, and for our heroine as a saint, it is a very significant event. Although she may hold a title and be an ordinary person on the day of the festival, she becomes the embodiment of God. That's why everyone had gathered to prepare her for the event. The girl was already tired of asking them not to overdo it. However, not only the aristocrats, but the emperor himself bows before her. According to aristocratic etiquette, the saint was required to cover her face. At that moment, Lenevin addressed her, reminding her to cover her face. She can't show herself as a commoner. However, she said that everything is fine because today is dedicated to her. That's why she asked if he could support her in everything she would do today. The guy said he always followed her orders. Emilian smiled and told him he was a kind person. Suddenly, someone nudged a little girl who was standing in the crowd of people and looking towards Emilian's. The girl fell to the ground, and people around her began to ask in bewilderment what was happening. At that moment, one of the guys screamed and asked the commoner in bewilderment how she dared to block his way. The girl tried to speak but couldn't. The boy grabbed her and asked what she was mumbling, and soon after told her to get out of there. The little girl was saying she was in pain. Our heroine noticed everything happening at that very moment and ordered the march to be stopped. After getting out of the carriage, our heroine told Lenevin that she had a request. She asked that all the fuss be stopped and the child brought to her right now. The guy said that he understood her, so he would be back in a few moments. At this time, the man continued to scream and pull the little girl along with him. He was incredibly angry that she managed to ruin such an important day for him. However, Lenevin came running at that moment and ordered the man to let the child go immediately. The boy's expression immediately changed upon seeing the high priest Lenevin asked him if he noticed the march had been stopped. Sviata was extremely displeased with his actions. Nevertheless, the man shouted and said that she was the real culprit. He wanted to take her away so she wouldn't get in the way. Lenevin still ordered him to shut his mouth. He remembered his face and the uniform of his squad, so he ordered him to return to his place. Almost with tears in his eyes, he began to run away, and Lenevin turned to the girl and asked her to come to him. After some time, the guy came to the saint with the girl whom he took. Our heroine said that he had done a good job, and soon looked at the girl and asked her name. The girl was silent when suddenly Lenevin told her that the saint had asked a question, so she needed to answer. The girl was very frightened. Emilian turned to the assistant and said that she did not ask to be brought in, so that she could greet her properly. And again, our heroine said they could try again. She asked if the girl could tell her name. Our heroine touched her face. The girl shyly said that her name was Deville. Emilian smiled and told her that her name translated as the sacred sound of a bell. At the sanctuary, her name would be appreciated. The girl, on the contrary, said that many people laughed at her name. Our heroine was surprised by this, but in response, she said that she really liked this name. Next, she decided to introduce herself, so she said her name was Emilion, a bird flying across a blue sky. That's how the saint's name is interpreted. At that moment, Emilian handed the bottle to the girl. She then said that if Develle had any problems, she could come to the sanctuary, and she would warn everyone in advance so that they would open the door to a girl named Develle. After this, the girl turned to the saint and decided to thank her for protecting them every time. Our heroine was very surprised that she decided to tell her this, but soon said that there was no need to thank her. Then she got out of the carriage and invited Lenevin to get out and walk to the palace. The boy agreed. There's power in words after all. Walking past the crowd, our heroine hoped that each of them would find happiness. Emilian believed that her sincerity would touch their souls and they would change. The action moves forward a bit. Our heroine is already sitting in her chair. At this moment, one of the aristocratic families approached God's grace and greeted her kindly. Emilian had heard that the aristocrats' behavior had changed dramatically, and now she saw it for herself. She wished them God's blessing. What is more surprising is that not everyone's eyes were filled with fear like some others. On the contrary, there is also a large part who look at her with genuine admiration. Emilian said that now, no one except members of the imperial family could stand above them. That's why His Majesty worries about their every move and every activity in the sanctuary. Thanks to them, no one would dare to attack the sanctuary. Emilian was glad that Lenevin realized how underestimated the temple had been until now. Anyway, she said that the sanctuary has absolute power as long as God is on their side. It seemed strange to try to attack a tiger cub unaware of how dangerous it could be. Lenevin assumed that no one else would try to harm the sanctuary. Our heroine told him that she had already answered his question. For generations, the throne had belonged to one family, the Emperor of the Vesaloyal Empire. If they expand the power that they have held all this time, they will be destined to meet someone who wants to do harm. At that moment, our heroine remembered Lady Nestro and asked where she was. The guy said he didn't know, but if she had arrived, she would have come over to say hello. He then asked why she was looking for him. Emilian looked at him in surprise and said she was talking about him. Would he like to meet her? The guy asked again, perplexed, and then said he didn't want to. Why did she think that? Emilian thought for a moment, and Jessie Fautre asked him point blank if he liked Lady Nestro. The guy looked at her in bewilderment and asked Jessie Fautre to refrain from making such statements. The girl immediately apologized. Anyway, the guy said that all of that was in the past. Now he doesn't want anything to do with her. Emilian was shocked by this answer. She asked him if he didn't love her. Linovan continued asking if Lady Emilian was in the same boat. Were his feelings really so weak that he could so easily give up on love and not even think about it? She immediately dismissed the thought, as she was sure he had serious feelings. But why wasn't he happy then? At that very moment, our heroine interrupted her thoughts, because she suddenly smelled an intoxicating aroma. The girl immediately turned to her assistants and asked if they could smell a sweet smell. They didn't understand what they were talking about, and this surprised our heroine. After all, the aroma was strong. At that moment, while our heroine was scanning the room from all sides, she noticed something very strange. A man grabbed the boy and began pulling him into the room. Our heroine instantly jumped up from the throne, not even understanding what was happening there. The girl ran down without explanation, and in response to Linovan's puzzled questions, she told him to bring 2 knights and follow her. At that moment, she opened the curtains just as the man was shouting at the guy. The saint burst into the room and asked in bewilderment what was going on. Was everything all right? Instantly, the guy who could be seen at the very beginning of the story was very happy to see the saint who came here. Our heroine couldn't take her eyes off him. She hadn't thought anyone could be more beautiful than the Nestro children. Still, what was she thinking? She needed to come to her senses. She instantly ordered the knights to seize the man. While the man was screaming in confusion and asking what was going on, Lady Emilian approached the guy and asked if he was okay. At that moment, she noticed his jacket, which had some kind of royal crest on it. She didn't know what country it belonged to, but most likely this guy was a prince. Nevertheless, he apologized for causing a fuss. Our heroine said he had nothing to apologize for, but he still brought up the fact that today was the first day of the festival. Emilian asked him not to worry and to go out. If he did it quickly and carefully, no one would notice. She assured him that everything was fine now. Our heroine stood up, not understanding why she began to feel dizzy. Anyway, she turned to Linovan and asked the high priest to get this guy out of here. Soon they left, and the Marquis of Cheverly, at that moment, was on his knees asking the saint for forgiveness, saying that a mistake had been made. The man said he was a little drunk and mistook his opponent. In that case, Emilian assumed he'd intended to do the same to someone else. Soon after, our heroine nodded her head and approached His Highness. The guy asked what happened, but she immediately said that the Marquis of Cheverly had caused a commotion. In relation to the guests who came to celebrate the goddess festival, this was at the very least ugly. The girl looked at him and told the crown prince that on this special day they could not allow such a thing to happen. The guy nevertheless sighed and said that it was only his mistake. Emilian asked in surprise if this was enough to resolve such a stupid situation. The boy turned to the knights and ordered them to seize the Marquis of Cheverly and take him to the underground prison. And again, the man began screaming in terror, asking them to wait and talk to him. It had been just a small mistake. They began to lead him away, but he still shouted, saying he hadn't meant to offend the saint. Our heroine sighed, but seeing Linovan, she asked if he'd let him in. The guy said he'd left him in the hallway with a servant, and he'd probably already made it to his carriage. Ah, but Emilian wanted to hear the victim's story. One way or another, the Marquis of Cheverly needed to be questioned first. The girl turned to Jessie and asked if she recognized the guy. She replied that she remembered this family. If she wasn't mistaken, it was the Prince of the AC Kingdom. The Kingdom of AC means, in that case, the girl decided it was high time to go down to the prison. Meanwhile, the man continued to shout loudly, saying that it was an accident. He continued to shout and ask for mercy because this would never happen again. Jessie Fautre suddenly pointed out that this was an oversight. Emilian asked again. The girl said she had heard that the Marquis of Cheverly preferred to play with children, not adults. She said that the omission was precisely that the guy was quite an adult man, albeit a very handsome one. Our heroine, perplexed, asked about the children. Jessie explained that the Marquis always took in children from commoner families or orphans as young as 10. When she found out about this, there were 14 of them, and of course, this man did not bring them to his place with the best intentions. Emilian then asked Lenevin why this man wasn't on the list when the sanctuary conducted its investigation. The young man replied that the Marquis supported all the children. Our heroine began to laugh. Were they really trying to tell us that if it weren't for the Marquis, these children would have died of hunger or disease? She overlooked it. Since the case involved children from the slums, it's not surprising they didn't pay enough attention. Soon our heroine asked Lenevin and Jesse to leave the room. The boys were a little surprised. Either way, they disobeyed the saint's orders, so she was left alone with the Marquis' 14 children. That means, at such a young age, they suffered a terrible trauma, perhaps without even realizing it. No matter how hard it was, they continued to blame themselves for their helplessness. These thoughts consumed them completely, and it was disgusting. She instantly grabbed him by the collar, saying that knowing the truth, she would never leave this matter alone. Cheverly was perplexed and said that these were ordinary commoners, so they shouldn't care about such non-entities. Our heroine told him he had a hidden talent for irritating people. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Of course, Emilian is not stupid, so she immediately let go of the Marquis of Cheverly. At that moment, the same guy entered the room, apologizing prematurely. He introduced himself as Alois. Our heroine introduced herself in response, and then asked why and how he was there. The guy said he was the one causing her problems, so he decided to visit her. However, the boy said that the kingdom would not forgive the Marquis's sins, so she should not have interfered in this matter herself. This was unexpected, as she had thought he was the type to avoid conflict. Then she could avoid interfering in the prince's affairs. Our heroine still said that she would not disturb them, so the guy thanked her. Soon after, he asked if she would allow him to visit the shrine. Emilian certainly didn't expect such a request, but she smiled nonetheless, and said that he could come whenever he wanted. Alice thanked her and said that he would warn her in advance of his visit. At that moment, he started to leave, but our heroine smelled a strange smell, so she grabbed his hand. Their gazes met, but soon he tripped and knocked her to the ground. They looked at each other in bewilderment. The guy immediately jumped up and said that he was very sorry that this happened, and that he was asking for forgiveness. He extended his hand and asked if she was okay, but Emilian wondered to herself, was he feigning awkwardness? Our heroine also decided to play a little, so she extended her hand and shyly said that everything was fine. He again reminded her that she wanted to see him on some matter. Emilian immediately remembered this. She said she smelled a sweet aroma at the banquet and thought it was him. What would he say to that? Alice was embarrassed and slightly perplexed when he asked her again. He soon turned around and said he wasn't sure and that he was sorry. Our heroine was surprised by his reaction, but still said that she was most likely mistaken, so he could go ahead. He came out shortly after that, and Emilian didn't even expect him to avoid answering like that. The prince may have appeared as a shy fawn, but what kind of beast lurked within him? She was quite interested in why he wore a mask, but still the question was not an easy one. After some time, our heroine ordered the title to be revoked and that freak to be sent into exile. She explained her words by saying that the Marquis of Cheverly deserved his due. Even if someone objected, the order had to be carried out. She then ordered the Marquis's men to be transported to the temple. Jessie Fautre turned to Lady Emilian in confusion. After all, the Kingdom of Issy could request the relevant credentials. Emilian said they would most likely do so. However, she intends to punish the Marquis for using children in his dirty games. In that case, Jessie Fautre advised thinking things over again. His Majesty would certainly not punish the Marquis for this reason. Emilian said she understood her anxiety. Many aristocrats had fallen because of her, and it all felt like chaos. But when stability was needed, no one would resort to arms. Moreover, she looked around and said that everyone believed that the Marquis's deeds would not be made public. In any case, she approached Jessie Fautre and said that she couldn't think like that. He brought her home, fed her, and put her to bed. Could this atone for all her sins? Emilian feared the price the Marquis must pay was too great. For this reason alone, our heroine did not see any reason for leniency. Jessie Fautre now understood Emilian's persistence, so she apologized to the lady and said that she understood. Just at that moment, the emperor appeared, who, as planned, said that those children were commoners, so there was no need to get angry over trifles. Emilian wanted to say something, But the emperor interrupted her, saying that they had many foreign ambassadors visiting them, so it was better not to undermine the authority of the empire with trifles. Well, the emperor, he's currently the only remaining ruler of Vessaloyal. He's the most influential figure here, with the exception of Emilian. She's tired of hearing and seeing this kind of behavior from influential people. We can't let such a scoundrel hold power. That's why the ruler needs to be replaced, so that power can pass to her. Emilian said with disdain that she now understood how his beloved majesty felt. All the people exclaimed in bewilderment. And at that moment, the emperor calmly asked the saint what she had just said. The girl asked what was wrong. Had her approach really offended him? During the festival, she had the highest status. Then she smiled and asked if she really should switch to informal address. The emperor immediately shouted and ordered her to stop being rude. Emilian told him in response that if he was not happy with something, then first he should work on his manners. Our heroine knew she needed a higher position. She wanted to see the ideal emperor before her. Still, she was afraid to take on responsibility, so she began looking after a small temple. Had she been born here, would she have been a little braver? In any case, she said that no one would raise the issue, so she only wanted one thing from the ruler. Fulfillment of his moral duty, the man asked, surprised. The girl said that the imperial law does not contain any clause regarding harm to commoners or representatives of secular society, and there is also no clause regarding impunity. She knew that her decisions were likely influenced by the fact that she was from another world. Our heroine looked at him and said one thing. In her opinion, the state can only be governed by a highly moral person who is capable of creating the points she mentioned. The man sighed and asked her not to go too far, but she decided to repeat it again. She said she was no longer going to indulge in laissez-faire behavior, letting crimes go unpunished by those who live and play on the city's taxes. The emperor was incredibly angry and watched the saint with fury in his eyes, not understanding what she was allowing herself to do. Meanwhile, the action takes us outside. After these negotiations, Emilian happily enjoyed the night air. At that moment, Lenevin, horrified, caught up with Lady Emilian. Our heroine asked where Jessie Fautre had gone. The guy said he would bring her, but our heroine said that there was no need to do this, because she was sure that she needed time to come to her senses. She may have done what a saint should not do, namely cross the very sun of the empire, but she is a saint nonetheless. With her godly power, she wants to help people who are at rock bottom to help them rise up. Our heroine looked into Lenevin's eyes and asked if this was the saint's mission. Anyway, she said that it was time for them to go back, but there was no need to worry about her. Finally, the girl told him he could calmly catch up with everyone else. Soon he watched her go. Suddenly, he grabbed his chest and said that this is why he loves Lady Emilian so much. The very next morning, the girl woke up thinking that it was worth going to bed early because her fatigue disappeared as if by magic. During the festival, most of the time should be spent in the imperial palace. But she remained in the temple, of course, because of yesterday. Although Lenevin still copes with the tasks perfectly well without her, so it was worth doing her own thing. After some time, she was holding in her hands the imperial code of laws, which was quite heavy, although this was not surprising. In any case, most of this book is about aristocrats exploiting common people. There are simply no words. She needed to make sure that none of them could manipulate the people any more as they pleased. That is why she had to supplement all the articles of the code with suitable points. Sighing, she decided that most likely she would spend the entire festival doing nothing but messing around with them. Anyway, she took the book, so she decided that she should go to the bedroom and study the book properly there. After some time, our heroine began to climb the steps, holding the book tightly. Unexpectedly, she accidentally tripped and soon realized that she was falling down. The girl was already preparing herself for how badly she would be hurt, but at that moment someone caught her. Alois, perplexed, told her she needed to be careful, as it was extremely dangerous. He then asked if she was hurt. Our heroine turned to him in surprise, and the guy said that he was glad that she remembered him. Still, she wondered what he was doing there, especially without servants. In any case, she thanked him for his help. The guy looked down shyly and said that he would be only too happy to help her. And again, she felt the same dizzying feeling as last time. Pulling herself together, Emilian asked him how he ended up there. He said he had an important promise to fulfill. Emilian assumed he was there because of the news of the prince's arrival. She then asked why he was alone. The guy said that, to be honest, he is not very much loved by the royal family. He bowed again, saying he should apologize to her for his ignorance. He intended to keep his visit to the temple a secret from his father. The girl immediately assumed it was a lie. She hadn't been able to get any information on him yet. But the fact remained. He was hiding something. She decided she should try to play along and find out why Emilian apologized, saying she'd touched on an awkward topic. However, she still decided to ask why he was not accompanied by servants. The guy said that they accompanied him, but in the temple, without noticing, he separated from them. Our heroine pretended to believe him. Did he really want her to believe his words? Just when the girl decided that his excuse was a little lacking, her gaze suddenly turned downwards. Noticing the leg that was missing, she was perplexed. When did he disappear? Then she began to analyze how she looked in general, unwashed, disheveled, and what's more, in a nightgown. Realizing that this was an incredible shame, she decided that she needed to run away from here as quickly as possible. However, at that moment, Prince Alois sat down and apologized. He placed a slipper on her foot. Immediately after this, he stood up and, picking up the book, asked to be allowed to accompany her to the room. Now was the time to pretend she'd come to her senses. Emilian thanked him sheepishly. The guy smiled, and after they walked forward, our heroine picked up one piece. Now she was absolutely sure that the prince was seducing her. However, in reality, he was not in love, but only pretending to be. One way or another, our heroine was left with only one question. What did he want from her? And surprisingly, the answer didn't take long to come. The guy suddenly turned to Emilian and said he needed her help. Of course, our heroine's first reaction was to ask in bewilderment what the request for help was all about. The guy said that he understands that they are not particularly close, so he cannot feel ashamed to ask her for help. Emilian asked him not to say that she wanted to know why he had come so far. That's why she asked him to let go of his worries. Soon a smile appeared on his face. Our heroine immediately assumed the prince thought she'd fallen for his trick. In that case, she needed to continue playing along. The guy said that he had learned that Essie wanted to revive slavery. Our heroine was shocked by these words. As far as she knew, the previous saint had abolished it. The guy said that it was true, but since she was no longer alive, the father was making efforts to return everything to normal. It can't be. Emilian didn't know that such chaos was going on outside the empire. Anyway, the guy raised his head again and said that, as she could guess, he was against the slave system. Emilian was surprised. Could this really be true? Or was this just another lie? Alois continued to say that he was only the fourth prince, and that his elder brother, the main heir, shared his father's opinion. He'd heard that the previous saint had barely achieved the abolition of slavery. If that system were to return to their kingdom, it was terrifying to imagine what would happen. Other states will immediately start to stir, so he tells this because he expects them to adhere to the same position. The boy bowed again and asked the saint to help him. Our heroine paused. The saint's help meant, as God's agent, she belongs to no single state. In other words, she must care not only for the empire, but also for other lands. She knew that interest in the slave system had not died down, but then the prince said that his kingdom wanted to revive it on its own. Alois at this point said that he was ashamed that being a prince he could not do anything. Our heroine couldn't figure out whether his strength was truly insufficient, or whether he had something else in mind. Either way, she said she understood. That's why she said she'd help his country. The guy jumped up and asked, perplexed, if it was true. Our heroine told him she saw no point in lying to him, as he said they were on the same page. In order to find out what was on the mind of such a complex opponent, it was worth letting him get as close as possible. After some time, the prince left, so it was time to meet the person who was simply necessary in her future affairs. Hearing no response after knocking our heroine sighed and told Jessie that she was coming in. Opening the door, she noticed a completely dark room in which Jessie Fotra was sitting on her bed. Our heroine asked why she was crying, but the girl began to apologize and say that she shouldn't have spoken to her like that. However, Emilian hugged the girl and asked her to stop crying because she wasn't right about everything either. The girl wanted to say something, but our heroine interrupted her and asked if she knew why she started screaming. Looking down, she said that her subjects were much more important to her than the authority of the empire or the temple. Emilian smiled and said that was true. She was very smart, and she believed that she would understand everything right away. Nevertheless, our heroine decided to ask if her anger was a mistake. Jessie jumped up and said it wasn't. Our heroine asked why not if she didn't agree. Jessie Fotra lowered her gaze and said that she did not agree at the time, but she ordered the children, whom the Marquise kept locked up, to be brought. When confronted by these children in the temple, the girl immediately realized the reason for Emilien's anger. Still shaking with fear and guilt, she said that was why she was to blame. Our heroine then asked Jessie what she would do if the saint's path turned out to be wrong. The girl said that the reason she, a renegade, was still alive was because she, Lady Emilien, had accepted her here. That's the only reason she said she would support any decision Emilien makes. Our heroine smiled and told her that was wrong. Her job hadn't changed at all. If Jessie thought she was doing the wrong thing, she asked us to convince our heroine otherwise. Looking at the tearful Jessie Fotra, our heroine asked her if she understood these words. The girl smiled and said that she did. Meanwhile, the third day of the festival had already arrived. Emilien was having breakfast when she received a letter from Nestro County. Then she raised her head and realized that she had come along with this letter. Lunella Nestro smiled sweetly at the saint and greeted her. The letter had been sent in advance, and she had only arrived very quickly. Emilien knew that, judging by the letter she'd sent, she was feeling better than she had at the hunting tournament. Anyway, she said she was glad to see him and asked the reason for his visit. The girl said that she heard rumors about what happened on the first day of the festival, so she was worried and decided to visit Emilien. Our heroine smiled and said everything was fine, but she was grateful for the concern. She then invited her to sit down. Lunella told the saint that she could call her any time if she needed someone to talk to, and she would gladly accept the offer. Our heroine said that it would be a sin to refuse such an offer, but nevertheless, she did not dare take it away from the others. Once again, Nella reminded of her smile while telling Lady Emilien that everything was fine, because being next to her was real happiness for her. However, during her last appointment, a lot became clear to her. For example, she wouldn't allow just anyone to be near her, so she wanted to know if, after all, she could still consider herself even a little bit special to Emilienes. Our heroine said that if she says so, then she should think carefully about this issue. Soon after, she got up from the table and said that she needed to step away for a moment. After stepping away for a bit, our heroine began to think that something similar had already happened. From that moment until this day, does Lunella Nestro really want to gain power over her too? She assumed that, like other aristocrats, she was disliked. However, she now realized that the situation was rather ambiguous. As soon as our heroine had put herself in order, after a while, she returned to the gazebo. At that moment, she noticed an interesting sight. Lunella Nestro was standing over a broken vase, perplexed, saying that this was too much. Emilien couldn't understand whether her guest had really broken a vase. At that moment, the girl was saying that I didn't like everything, whether it was the prince, the duke, or the saint. For some reason, everyone's reaction wasn't the one she wanted to see. She always felt uncomfortable here. Soon after, she began repairing the vase with her magic. Was Lady Nestro really a mage? Although it's possible since her older brother is one. However, she did not understand why she was hiding her power. But at that moment, the girl called her name. She'd barely mentioned our heroine's name, and she was already uncomfortable. Regardless, Lunella, perplexed, asked where the saint was. At this moment, our heroine decided to pretend that she was approaching, so the girl immediately heard footsteps. Upon seeing Emilien, the girl instantly smiled and happily said that she had been waiting for her. Our heroine apologized for keeping her waiting. Nella told her everything was fine. While she was gone, she'd been admiring the beautiful garden. Yeah, he's lying like he breathes. Nevertheless, she told Emilien that this garden is the temple's pride. The past saint labored over it for a very long time. At that moment, Jessie Fotra, who had been calling the lady and telling her something about the crown prince, screamed in horror. The guy was behind Jessie at the time, so he immediately said hello. Surprised that they were having tea, Lunella Nestro jumped up in disbelief upon seeing His Highness. Our heroine, in turn, asked what brought him here. The guy said he couldn't keep up with her, even at the festival. Emilien told him she had a lot to do. And again she approached him, asking the question once again. What was the reason for this sudden visit? Casadora said they needed to talk. He immediately apologized for arriving unannounced. He was afraid she would cancel the meeting if he sent a letter. Emilien decided that it was a silly excuse, but said that she would make tea for them, so she asked what kind of tea they wanted. Lanella Nestro advised His Highness to drink Esfol. This healing tea is available only at the temple and is said to have a truly amazing aroma. Casadora asked the saint what she'd been drinking. As soon as Emilian said she'd been drinking herbal tea, not Esfol, the boy asked for herbal tea. She warned him that he might not like it, but he said he didn't care. In that case, the saint asked him to sit down. After a while, she brought tea, and the prince began to talk about when she had a fight with his father. Emilian realized they were talking about the first day of the festival, and it was odd that he made it look like an argument. She said they simply disagreed. The boy then offered to apologize since his father hadn't wanted discord. He lacked empathy after all. He was responsible for a huge country. That is why he would like the saint to forgive him. And at this moment, our heroine interrupted him. She immediately slammed the table, saying that if he came here for this, then he had better leave. The guy guiltily lowered his gaze and said that if this was the saint's wish, then that's what he would do. Our heroine was surprised that he had simply given in. Hadn't he come to convince her? At that moment, Lanella Nestro told His Highness that the smell was strange. Was he really going to drink this tea? The guy came closer and sniffed it. He soon said that the aroma was truly unusual. Emilian had no idea he'd like this tea. In that case, she took out some candies and happily said that he could take them too, since they tasted the same. They improve concentration and clear the mind. Just one candy is enough. These are the same candies that Jesse and Leneven won. She beat him pretty good, but it was a shame to lose the candy. The guy looked at the jar in surprise and asked if the saint really liked that kind of thing. Our heroine confidently replied, yes, she did. Soon she asked if he didn't like them. The prince handed the candies to his assistant and said he hadn't tried them yet. However, he said that he might still like them as the process progresses. Our heroine looked at him in surprise, not understanding what had happened to him. At that very moment, tragedy struck. The prince's assistant dropped the jar, which soon fell to the ground and shattered. The boy, horrified, began to scream that he had not done it on purpose, but Casadora Macron told him that he had dared to spoil the saint's gift, so he would be punished with a whip. Nevertheless, the boys fell to the floor where the broken glass lay and began to tell His Highness that they were very sorry. The prince, surprised, asked his other assistants what they were waiting for. The two culprits were immediately seized, despite their pleading. Our heroine looked at him and asked him to order His Highness to make the knights leave. The boy still said that those who happened would be punished at the imperial palace. He had no intention of tarnishing the temple's reputation. However, the girl stood her ground and said that it was only a jar that had broken, so there was no need to get angry. The prince replied that they had broken something that belonged to him. She knew well that mistakes must be paid for. Emilian was surprised that the prince wanted to equate the broken jar with the crimes of her acquaintance, punishment for which she demanded. At the reception, he showed that he knew how to retreat, so she considered him a little better than the emperor, but still, if this was the only way he got it, then she decided to play along with him once again. Emilian suddenly told him she was disappointed in him. He turned to her in surprise and asked what that meant. Our heroine said that she felt like she asked him to call off the knights. The fact that he is now being familiar with her does not mean that he is allowed to go against his will. At that moment, Lanella Nestro began to scream in tears and ask them not to fight. It is hard for her to watch them quarrel, and her heart is already breaking from the fact that the saint's gift is broken. However, since the services have caused harm to His Highness, would it not be right for him to decide their future fate? Emilian was surprised Nella was quite smart and cruel. She didn't expect that from her. However, Casadora said that Lanella was right, who gave the saint the right to interfere in her affairs. Our heroine turned around and reminded him that his business was related to her gift. Soon she asked the two guys their names. The boys said with trembling voices that the first one was called Tesh Oshap and the second one was Florent Rilta. Our heroine understood that they were afraid. They were afraid that she would be angry, which was why they were so nervous when they said their names. Emilian looked at Tesh and asked who his family was. He replied that he had a father, an aunt, and 3 nephews. She wanted to know more about them. The guy said that their father was unwell, and their aunt couldn't walk, so he was raising his nephews. There was a big age difference between them. So it turns out, not all the heir's servants are wealthy aristocrats. She then glanced at Florent and asked what about him. The boy said he had a mother, a father, and a younger sister. Dad works as a senior servant, so he decided to follow in his footsteps. His younger sister plans to get married in a month. Emilian thanked them for their sincerity. Soon she asked His Highness whether the stories of these people had inspired any thoughts. The prince said he didn't understand what she was getting at. Our heroine said, "You'd have to be slow-witted not to understand that. Didn't he remember her conversation with His Majesty?" Casadora asked how this was connected. His servants broke the jar of sweets that Emilian told him that she could give him 100 sweets. However, she wanted to convey to him that a lost person cannot be brought back. Casadora Macron glanced at her and added that he had no intention of killing these guys. The whip was a rather lenient punishment. Our heroine did not listen to his words and still insisted that he pardon his servants. She decided to repeat that if he lost a person by torturing his flesh or heart, then the end would come. As he remembered, she wanted to see a ruler who knew morality on the throne, and therefore she wanted him, the future emperor, to understand the basics necessary for a leader. Soon she poured out the tea and asked the prince to reflect on what makes a ruler a ruler. The boy answered her that in the Imperial Academy, softness is frowned upon, because the ruler must always demonstrate his greatness. He told her that she should know that subjects need a strong hand from a ruler. Emilian told him she doubted it. If, in his view, a ruler's strength manifests itself in the suppression of the weak, then she wondered how many would follow him. Not only does he have loved ones, but the people also have their own families and soulmates. This is why perhaps His Highness should treat people with kindness. The guy wanted to say something in response, but he still gritted his teeth and turned around silently. Lanella Nestro watched Her Highness leave and called out to him in surprise. Soon the girl apologized to Mrs. Emilian and said that she would send her a message next time. At this moment, the servants of the Crown Prince decided to bow before the saint and thank her. The girl told them that if the situation worsened, they could report it to the temple. The boys sheepishly said they were fine and would go. Actions are brought to the evening. Jesse Fotra said that Alois Ace is currently the 4th Ace prince. His mother was of the Istian line, which meant the prince had little chance of claiming the throne. Emilian asked what kind of race they were, to which the maid replied that they were a tribe of thieves wandering around the western part of the kingdom. However, she then said that she had learned something interesting, namely that Duchess Nestro was King Essay's younger sister. Our heroine was perplexed. Judging by this information, it appears that Prince Alois is Lonella and Veron's cousin. After some time, there was another meeting with Alois, who greeted the saint. Our heroine smiled at him and said that God's blessing would be with him. She greeted him. The guy took Emilian's hand and kissed it, thanking her for the warm welcome. He soon said that he understood that his request might seem difficult to her. Our heroine remembered that she had promised to prevent the restoration of the slave system, but they had not discussed the details, which is why he came. The guy suddenly said that he was ready to pay a decent price, since he was turning to her, and not just anyone. Emilian asked about the price. Was he really willing to give anything in return? If the conversation was once again about money or exquisite delicacies, or even charming jewelry, then such boring gifts will disappoint her. At that moment, the boy knelt down and asked the saint to help him become king. Our heroine asked what he was talking about, and he said that he was far inferior to other contenders for the throne, so he could not do without her help. Emilian decided he was right, and also that Alois knew one thing perfectly well. Only she could help him without tarnishing his status. The guy said that her decisions come first for him, and it would be much easier for her to create the state she wanted if they acted together. Leaning towards her, he said that he would give her everything she wanted, even the state. That is why he approached her and asked if she would allow him to serve her. Our heroine understood that if the kingdom of Ace came into her possession, it would become the inviolable property of the temple, and then a sacred state would be born. But at that moment, she decided to tell His Highness that this was a rather tempting offer. However, she could not agree, because in her opinion, they were not yet familiar enough to solve such serious problems together. She asked for a little more time, and he soon agreed. Thus the prince left empty-handed. However, the very next day, a miracle occurred. An orphanage opened at the church. Lenevin stood at the entrance and monitored all the children. The guy told everyone to enter one by one. The joyful children shouted and said that they understood the high priest perfectly. In that case, he said that they could come in, and a moment later, All the children ran inside in a whole crowd. A short time later, they were inside. The children were surprised by how clean and spacious it was. There were even a whole bunch of beds, and very large ones. Next, they noticed a huge dining room in which they would definitely fit everything. Our heroine was very happy that the children liked her gift. However, the girl's joy ended as soon as Alois appeared behind her and greeted the saint. Our heroine asked what he was doing there, to which the guy said that he was extremely interested in the shelter, so he wanted to go inside. The girl said he could do it, but the children probably wouldn't show him the respect he deserved. Is he sure he wants to? The guy said that this was his sincere desire, because he does not boast about his status, and by the way, promises not to create any problems. In that case, our heroine agreed and said that she would warn everyone, and in the meantime, he could look around the place. She didn't expect this turn of events, but perhaps this was a chance to get to know the prince better. At this moment, one of the girls managed to scratch her hand on a thorny bush. Our heroine approached Develle and began to heal her hand, asking if she liked the new house. The girl happily thanked Emilian for what she was doing, and also asked if this was really her house. Emilian said that's true, and this is a home for other kids too. Until she grows up and gets her life together, she'll always be welcome here. Devil asked in bewilderment if she really wouldn't have to wander anymore. Our heroine stroked her head and said that everything was correct, so she could rest assured. The girl screamed that she was very happy, and also that she loved this place, but she loved Emilian the most. After that, our heroine advised her to go and play with the others. That's exactly what Develle decided to do. It hadn't even been a day, but it seemed like many of the kids had already settled in. Emilian was pleased about that. However, at that moment, she noticed something strange ahead, or rather in the bushes. Soon our heroine approached them, and looking in, asked Chung Ina in bewilderment what she was doing there. The girl asked the girl not to sit there as she might get hurt or get bitten by bugs, so it's better to get out. The girl, however, said that was the only way they could find her. Our heroine sat down and asked perplexed who they were talking about. What was going on? Chung Ina said Cheryl and Roy have been fighting constantly lately, and she doesn't know whose side to take. She just wants to be alone. Soon after this story, a boy and a girl appeared, looked at Chung En in bewilderment, and asked what she was doing there. Nevertheless, the children immediately greeted the saint. Our heroine looked at them and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The girl wanted to ask them something, but at that moment, Roy told Cheng to go play with him. Cheryl, perplexed, asked, "What about her?" since he was always suggesting all sorts of nonsense. The guy, surprised, asked if she wasn't delusional. And again, they collided like a cat and a dog and began to quarrel. Emilian now understood what was going on. Both children wanted to play with Chung, but separately. This is why it becomes clear why the girl was so sad when she found it. Soon the boy and girl turned to Chung and told her to choose who she wanted to go out with. The girl didn't know what was the best answer, so she was confused and stood there silently. Our heroine decided that from the outside it looked cute, but Chung was truly confused. In any case, she decided that nothing could be done, so she decided to reconcile them. At that moment, a guy behind her asked what happened. Our heroine wasn't even surprised to see Alois. It's good he came, though. What advice will the prince give them? Our heroine explained the problem. The boy soon became thoughtful. Chung is of interest to both of them, so he needs to steer the situation in the right direction. Emilian said he understood everything correctly. The guy suddenly asked if he could talk to the children. Our heroine was only too happy about this, so she said he could do it. Alois thanked her. The boy approached the children and asked the sons to pay some attention to their uncle. Holding the flower in his hands, he said it was an unopened flower. He would offer to play with it the way they offered Cheng's. The boy placed the flower under the scarf and began quoting the children's words. "I like you, don't you?" Then he wanted them to play only with him. Holding out a flower in their direction, he said that this flower had wilted. Cheryl, surprised, asked Alois why this had happened. The guy said they would find out the reason now. "I don't like arguments. I hate it when my opinion isn't taken into account. I want to play with everyone." The children cried out in bewilderment, wondering what this flower could say. Could it really be magic? In any case, Alois suggested they do as the flower asked. He placed the flowers under the handkerchief again and said, "I'm sorry we were stupid. Let's play together." A moment later, he lifted the handkerchief, and underneath the boys saw beautifully opened peonies. The children ran up to the flowers in bewilderment and started talking about how this was real magic. Alois asked the children if he remembered correctly that their names were Roy and Cheryl. The children said yes, and then the prince introduced himself as Al. He explained that Chung's feelings were like those flowers. No matter how much they liked her, if they didn't listen to her, she would be deeply offended. Roy looked at Mr. Al in confusion and said that Chung is a human being, and she didn't say that you don't like something. Nevertheless, he decided to ask where Chung was now. The children looked at him in surprise and noticed that she was standing behind the saint. Alois said that everything was correct. This is how she shows that she is repulsed by everything that is happening. Looking at the children who felt guilty, he suggested that they remember what he had said to the flower to make it open. Roy and Cheryl both started saying that they listened to him first and did what he wanted. The prince told the children that everything was true. It's the same with people. If you love, you need to listen to the person and try to understand them. That's what respect is. The boys looked at each other and decided that they needed to apologize to Chung to show her their respect. They turned to their friend and apologized for acting so stupidly. Chung asked if they would fight again. Cheryl said they definitely wouldn't, and Roy in turn said he couldn't promise that, but for her sake, he promised to try. At this point, Chung's expression instantly changed, and she said that she was incredibly happy. Meanwhile, our heroine was thinking that not every prince was capable of getting along so deftly with the children of commoners. Prince Los, just because of this act, he just grew in Emilien's eyes. And soon the action brings us to the final day of the festival. Our heroine has told Lenevin everything. The boy asked in surprise if the prince was truly kind. However, our heroine said that something else was more important right now. Picking up another letter, the girl asked Lenevin what he thought she would receive from the Duchy of Nestro today. The boy said that he understood that Prince Alois was polite with children, but he thought it was dangerous to accept such sudden proposals. He assumed that the prince was really only chasing the throne, but our heroine said that he apparently also wanted to seize the right to receive profits from the temple. In any case, it didn't conflict with their interests, so there was no reason to clash. Perhaps the prince's proposal could even have played into their hands. Lenevin said in surprise that he didn't quite understand, and our heroine decided to reveal a little secret to him. She smiled and said that she had started something very interesting and also threatening. The guy, confused, asked what that meant. Our heroine said she needed something from the man who wanted to get closer to her using Jesse. Lenevin immediately remembered the very incident when the presence of an anti-divine sect was discovered on the chandelier. The boy immediately asked the saint if she knew who the criminal was. Emilien said she had a guess. Lenevin began shouting angrily, saying that this scoundrel dared to attack the saint herself. Our heroine asked him to calm down. The situation made it impossible to catch him because there was no evidence, and it was necessary to preserve the image of the temple. At that moment, Lenevin looked at the saint and asked her directly why she did not value herself so much. Our heroine, perplexed, asked what this meant, to which the guy replied that she would throw herself into fire and water for others, but she didn't take care of herself at all. Emilien smiled at him and said that it was not strange because she simply would not die. After some time, they finally arrived, so Lenevin came out first and offered his hand to Lady Emilion. Our heroine, getting out of the carriage, began to look around, and as always saw the displeased looks of the aristocrats. Nothing but disdainful glances, and the hostess who invited our heroine is nowhere to be seen. Lenevin leaned towards Lady Emilion and said that all the people were wary because of their latest conflict with the emperor. Our heroine understood this herself, so she suggested that he go inside anyway. After a while, Lenella Nestro met them at the door, saying that she was very happy to see them. Emilion thanked her for the invitation. She said she'd assumed she was feeling unwell due to a recent incident, but she was as beautiful as ever. The girl then noticed the high priest and greeted him. Lenevin bowed and greeted her. The girl suddenly said that she understood that her reception might be far from ideal, but the boy interrupted her at that moment and said that was exactly how it was, since she hadn't bothered to go out and meet the saint. He advised her to be more careful next time. Our heroine looked at her assistant in bewilderment and could not believe what Lenevin had just said to Lenella Nestro's face. At this time, the girl was quite shocked by what happened, but still said that she would remember. Our heroine decided to lighten the mood, so she told Lady Nestro that they hadn't had lunch yet. The girl happily said that she had already prepared everything so they could follow her. On the way, she said that her reception was extremely modest, so she did not expect to see them today. But what a joy that they still arrived. At that moment, one of the maids began calling for Mistress Nestro in horror. Our heroine caught a whiff of something. A few seconds later, as soon as the maid said something to Lady Nestro, she turned to the saint and addressed her. Emilion asked what had happened. The girl said sheepishly that she had been told that her cousin was currently sitting in the dining room. She suggested that it would be awkward for her to share a meal, so she'd ask him to leave. Our heroine immediately stopped her and said that it wasn't worth it. Emilion said everything was fine, and the main thing was that he was comfortable. Now our heroine understood why it smelled so bad in here. After some time, they entered the room and found Alois, who was perplexed by the arrival of the guests. Emilion smiled at this meeting. Lanella Nestro, perplexed, asked the saint if they really knew each other. The guy came forward and said that they had met a few days ago, and he had had a chance to talk to my lady. Our heroine smiled at him, saying that accidents sometimes happen. Lanella asked what they'd talked about if it wasn't a secret. The boy smiled and said that the saint had helped him when the Marquis had set him up. Nella asked what that meant, but the guy said this conversation should remain confidential. Lanella Nestro, perplexed, said that was unfair. Nevertheless, the boy said she should pay attention to the saint, and indeed the girl apologized, saying it would be better to start with a meal. A short time later, they were sitting at the table eating. Lanella Nestro asked our heroine if she liked the food. Our heroine smiled and told the hostess that the food was as amazing as before. The girl said it was wonderful, and then asked Mr. Lenevin's opinion, and after him, she asked if her brother liked it. The guy said he always liked his sister's food, but Lenevin said the smell was too strong and the meat was too tough. These words came as a complete shock to Nella. Nevertheless, she sighed and said she understood her guest's point and would order a new dish. The guy, however, said that it was unnecessary because he had no right to complain when the saint was enjoying the food. Emilion couldn't understand why the guy had become so prickly with Nella. She decided he'd completely changed his attitude toward her. In that case, our heroine decided to add a little fuel to the fire. At that very moment, she accidentally spilled a glass of wine on herself. The boys jumped up in bewilderment and asked Mrs. Emilion if she was okay. Looking at such a violent reaction, the girl could not even imagine that the reaction would be like this. However, Alois immediately ran to her and gave her his jacket, assuming that she was very scared. Our heroine thanked him for his help, and Lenevin thought that it was the senior priest who should take care of the saint. Alois apologized for his unkempt robe, as he had no other option. Lenevin, however, said it wasn't the robe's tidiness that was the issue, but its heaviness. Emilion noticed that the high priest was acting like a little child today. Alois suddenly asked them to wait a bit while he ordered a new outfit. Our heroine smiled and said she would be very grateful. In that case, the task was accomplished. Thanks to this, she was once again convinced that the prince wanted to win her over. To get what he wants, Alois interacts kindly with the children and courts. Her Emilion couldn't help but notice how much she admired this guy's brazenness. At this point, our heroine turned to Lenevin and told him that she was going to accept the prince's proposal. But why was a secret? Either way, she asked him to just trust her. The guy smiled at her and asked who else he should trust, if not her. After some time, our heroine was transformed by the new outfit that was given to her. Lanella Nestro, perplexed, told the saint how incredibly well the dress suited her. Our heroine thanked them for lending it to her. She was in their debt. Soon Alois approached her and told Lady Emilion that she was magnificent. Emilion smiled and asked him not to flatter her. The guy suddenly smiled and asked if he could have the honor of accompanying her. Our heroine smiled at him and said that she agreed to this proposal without a doubt. At that moment, Lanella Nestro approached Lenevin and asked if he'd like to be her partner. Did he remember the last time he'd offered to accompany her? Due to her circumstances, she refused him then. But today Lenevin interrupted her and shook his head, apologizing because he refuses. Lanella Nestro was in complete shock. Emilion couldn't believe Lenevin had changed so much. What had happened between them? With tears almost in her eyes, Lady Nestro turned to the high priest and asked if she could find out the reason. Our heroine looked at him because she was also interested to know this, but he in turn looked up in her direction, embarrassed. Emilian decided that he could not be left in trouble, so she apologized to the prince, saying that today she was walking with Lenevin. However, there was some strange signal transmission error, so the guy took the words, "I will become your partner," as accept Linella's offer. At that very moment, he sheepishly apologized and told Lady Nestro that it was an honor for him to dance with her. Our heroine, of course, was very surprised by this outcome, but still the operation to rescue Lenevin failed. In this case, Alois approached Emilian again and told her that he was her gentleman for the evening. After some time, they came out into the hall, so Mrs. Emilian and His Highness Prince Alois were introduced to the people. Of course, no reaction was expected. As always, everyone began to look at them with disdain. Nevertheless, despite this, our heroine greeted everyone and wished for God's blessing to come to them. The people remained silent, and the girl thanked His Highness for keeping her company. The guy took her hand and kissed it, saying that he should be grateful to her. Seeing this, everyone began to whisper among themselves. What was going on between the prince and the saint? Could it really be love? At this moment, they began to introduce His Highness Crown Prince Cassador Macron Vessaloyal. Of course, everyone started applauding, as they were happy to welcome the Crown Prince. In any case, they didn't understand what he was doing there. Our heroine decided that he was most likely looking for Linella, so she wouldn't want to run into him. However, it was not possible to dodge, because he noticed Emilian and stopped her. Our heroine turned around shyly, asking him why he wanted to see her. The guy asked if she was implying he needed a reason Emilian said that was generally true, or did he think they were close enough? A dead silence fell between them after these words. This was certainly not what Cassadora Macron wanted to hear. At that moment, Alois bowed and wished His Highness good evening. Cassadora realized it was the same prince and decided it was an interesting duet. The young man suddenly said he'd heard that the emperor was planning to reinstate the Marquis of Cheverly. Our heroine angrily asked why he'd brought it up. The prince said that it seemed to him as if she did not know about this, and since she was a citizen of the empire, our heroine told him that she lived in a temple which was located on the territory of their empire. The guy, perplexed, asked what kind of nonsense this was, because from the moment she dedicated herself to their state, she became a citizen of Vessaloyal. Anyway, he said that although he had behaved tactlessly, they could not remove the Marquis from office because of such trifles. Our heroine, perplexed, asked if this was really such a trifle. The prince asked her not to be stubborn, as her consent was required, for the punishment to be lifted. The girl certainly didn't expect the prince to speak about this so calmly, in front of everyone. He was clearly making fun of her and Alois. Our heroine sighed, and told him that he apparently hadn't changed at all, and had come here again because of the case of the Marquis of Cheverly. She then said that if she left Vessaloyal, they would no longer have to try so hard. The prince turned around in bewilderment and asked her what these words meant. Our heroine asked if she couldn't do this. The guy said she couldn't, since saints never intermarried or left Vessaloyal. In that case, Emilian smiled broadly once again and said that she would be the first. Immediately, a whole host of rumors and whispers arose, asking if the saint was really leaving. What about the empire's prosperity? Who would destroy the monsters? The prince knew for sure that he could not allow the saint to leave the empire. At that moment, Cassadora Macron glanced at Alois and asked if this was really his doing. The boy asked again, perplexed. Containing his rage, Cassadora Macron screamed and asked if it was really because of him, an idiot, that the saint had become like this. Our heroine immediately intervened between the two men and ordered His Highness to calm down. She couldn't allow such quarrels and insults. However, the guy continued to shout and said that it was not he who should stop, but them. Suddenly, a strange but loud roar echoed through the hall. What happened again? At that very moment, one of the visitors pointed upward in horror and screamed, saying that there were monsters here. Our heroine looked where the guy was pointing, and indeed she saw two pairs of red eyes in front of her, watching everyone. The girl couldn't control her nerves anymore. It was the third time in such a short time. At that moment, Lenevin ran up to Mrs. Emilian. The boy asked if this was the work of the anti-divine cult. Again, Linella Nestro, meanwhile, was horrified and wondering what they should do now. Our heroine told the lady to take the people and get them out of here. No one was to get hurt. Before the attack, there was no oracle again, which was incredibly strange. Judging by the fact that the creatures have appeared in front of her for the third time, they are undoubtedly targeting her. Meanwhile, the people in the corner were perplexed, asking how this could have happened. They prayed to the saint for help because they didn't want to die. One of the guys approached the saint and asked her to destroy the monsters, just like she did during the attack on the temple. Our heroine turned around and told him that, unfortunately, that wouldn't happen now. The guy, just like the rest of the people, looked at her in surprise and asked why. Panic broke out among the crowd, as even the saint had said nothing would work. Were they all going to die? If our heroine could, she would have finished off all the monsters long ago. But due to the enormous power of God's punishment, she is not yet able to control it. At that moment, the girl noticed one of the visitors become ill. The girl sat over her mother, asking her to come to her senses. The saint immediately ordered Lenevin to come and help the woman. The boy ran to them and said he would help right away. Our heroine soon grabbed her dress, thinking she needed to pull herself together. Destroying monsters was her immediate responsibility. One way or another, she understood that the creatures hadn't reached them yet, so there was still time. She approached Prince Alois and addressed him. The girl approached him and said that unfortunately, she would have to borrow his dagger. Nevertheless, the guy screamed and told her it was dangerous. Our heroine asked him not to worry, as she might not be a knight, but she was capable of something. Lenevin, as soon as he noticed that the lady had taken the dagger, asked in horror if she was really going to go out to the monsters. Emilian assumed someone would have to fight back. The guy started saying he understood, but still. At this point, their conversation was interrupted by Prince Alois, who asked to entrust this matter to him. He would deal with them. The girl asked him if he'd ever dealt with monsters. He said he hadn't, but he was a knight, so he was sure he could handle it. In that case, Emilian smiled at him and said that she was counting on him. Soon the boy approached His Highness and asked if he could borrow his sword for a while. The prince wanted to say something, but Alois told him that he should stay in a safe place. Our heroine then approached him and asked him to hurry if he wasn't going to help. The crown prince said he would be in the rear, but he still held out his sword. He ordered them to deal with the creatures as quickly as possible. Alois respectfully took the sword and said he understood the prince's request. Our heroine thanked Casadora for her assistance. Soon the girl turned to Prince Alois and told him that among so many people, only he dared to challenge the monster. The guy started saying that he was a prince and he couldn't tarnish the honor of his kingdom, but at that moment the monsters got tired of waiting, so they started to act. Emilian immediately asked Lenevin to create a sacred barrier to repel their attacks. The boy said he would obey her. At that very moment, two huge monsters were able to break through and soon found themselves in the hall. Of course, panic broke out in the hall as soon as people saw two huge monsters. Our heroine, however, immediately indicated to the creatures who their target was, so she began calling them. Of course, the monsters couldn't help but react to the girl's voice, so they turned around. Our heroine cut a piece of her dress and soon told the monsters that they were doing well, so she told them to continue looking at their mother. At that very moment, she tore from her place and ran towards the huge monsters, who began to swing their hand. However, this game did not frighten the girl at all, because she swung her blade and cut her. The giant began to scream in terror, but at that moment he began to attack with his tail. Luckily, Lenevin came to the saint's aid in time, because he managed to pierce the monster's paw. Our heroine exhaled joyfully, because they were almost finished destroying these monsters. However, behind the girl, the screams of Lanella Nestro began to be heard, as a huge monster advanced on her. Soon the monster's paw began to fly towards her, with which he could flatten Lady Nestro in the blink of an eye. Realizing that nothing had happened, Lanella Nestro opened her eyes and noticed the saint standing before her. The girl shielded Lady Nestro and then asked if she was okay. Lanella asked why she did that. However, there was no time for talking now, because the huge monsters were still advancing. Our heroine took out her blade and instantly jumped towards the monster, plunging the blade into its body. Emilian tried to move the monster because it was too close to Lanella Nestro. At this point, the giant began to cough, which meant that this was most likely his end. Our heroine, seeing that he began to shrink, assumed that this was all. Soon her dagger fell to the ground, but Alois screamed in horror and reminded her that there was still one monster left. It was only by a miracle that the girl managed to make a dash and dodge the monster's devastating attack in time. Of course, Prince Alois immediately ran towards the monster to save Emilian. The guy pierced the giant so immediately after that, He told the saint that it was time for her to use her power. The girl ran up to the giant and literally just hugged him using her divine magic. The giant began to scream in horror, and strange smoke began to fly out of his eyes and mouth. After some time, our heroine discovered two monkeys on the floor that were wounded. A couple of minutes later, they came to our heroine, held them in her arms, and realized that they were indeed ordinary monkeys. After everything was finally over, Prince Alois walked up to Emilian and asked who it was. Seeing the prince's blade, the monkeys turned around. Emilian asked them not to be afraid, then said that they were baby monkeys apparently in their original form. In any case, the girl decided to ask the guy if he was injured, to which Alois said that everything was fine, unlike her. Looking at her shoulder, he said that the wound looked deep and needed to be treated immediately. Lenevin approached the lady with a handkerchief and asked her to listen to the prince. He still felt very awkward saying this, but since monkeys could become monsters, wouldn't it be better to kill them? Our heroine, perplexed, asked what he was talking about. She turned her head and looked into the eyes of these little ones, who looked as if into her soul. The girl said that they were not monsters now, so it was impossible to kill those who had been so heartlessly used. Lenevin still wanted to say something against it, but our heroine asked if he really thought she couldn't tell the difference between a monkey and a monster. She asked him not to worry, as it was time to return to the temple. The boy picked up the cubs and said he would carry them. Suddenly, our heroine felt her legs weaken and began to fall. Alois caught her instantly. The girl thanked him and said everything was fine. The guy said he'd pretend he hadn't heard her. He then apologized, but soon after picked her up, despite Emilian's words, to let her go. Then Alois told Lenevin they needed to go. The boy was perplexed. Some people carry monkeys, but others. However, Casadora Macron blocked their path and said he needed to speak with Alois. The young man said the lady needed peace. At that moment, our heroine also decided to chime in. She wanted to add something of her own. The girl handed over the sword and thanked him for his help, but said that they had nothing more to talk about. The crown prince took back the sword and began to watch them go. Lanella Nestro, who was still recovering from what was happening, did the same. The very next morning, our heroine finally woke up. Fortunately, she was able to rest and regain her strength. However, as soon as she stretched, she noticed one strange thing that she decided to check out. Pulling her shirt down a bit, she noticed that her shoulder was completely healed. Did her shoulders always heal so quickly? One way or another, she began to get up and wonder where the monkeys had gone. Perhaps they were with Alois. As soon as she stood up and walked a few meters, a wall suddenly appeared in front of her. Wishing her good morning, Alice found her himself and said she had made him very worried about her. Did she really give him a room yesterday, half asleep? In any case, he said it was amazing how quickly her wounds had healed. The girl said everything was fine, and that was precisely why she shouldn't worry anymore. By the way, she decided to ask what happened last night, or rather whether something strange happened. The guy said that overall nothing had happened that should worry her, but the only thing was that due to his mistake, someone had spread rumors about them. Although our heroine asked what rumors were being discussed, she still had an idea in her head. Many people never understood the format of their relationship with him, so they might have misunderstood it. At that very moment, the image of Alice picking her up flashed before Emilian's eyes. Everything became immediately clear. However, at that moment, one of the priests began to run in horror to the saint and ask her for help. After a while, they followed the priest. Our heroine immediately asked, perplexed, what had happened here. Before her, she saw incredible devastation in the garden, which happened for an unknown reason. The girl began to ask who did all this, but the priests, who showed no particular signs of life, did not answer her. At that moment, someone alive finally addressed Emilian. It was Lenevin. Our heroine ran up to him in confusion and asked why he was all beaten up. The guy said he'd warned her it was dangerous to bring them to the temple. At that moment, Emilian asked in horror if the monkeys had really done all this. Lenevin, with a tear in his eye, asked if she was surprised. At that moment, two happy monkeys appeared on the horizon and ran towards Emiliani. Lenevin, perplexed, began asking them who had given them permission to hug the mistress. The monkeys only laughed. Our heroine, however, was not as cheerful as before, so she asked them if Lenevin had told the truth. However, the monkeys again began to look at her with a look that evoked nothing but pity. Ms. Emilian sighed and apologized to Lenevin, saying she was apologizing for them. The boy asked him not to let those shameless eyes deceive him. Scratching his head, he said they were real monsters, and that she should be careful too. Our heroine laughed and told him to take the others and go get some rest. Soon the priests and Lenevin began to leave. Emilian asked what to do with them. Alois smiled, and taking one of the monkeys, asked to be allowed to carry them. However, the monkey began to scream, and soon after broke free from Alois's hand. The girl assumed the sweet buns were frightened. Alois suddenly suggested to the saint that she should change her attitude toward these animals. He reminded them that they were monsters just recently, and he felt that keeping them around wasn't the best decision. The girl said she agreed with him, but only partially. The guy asked why. Our heroine scratched the baby monkey's face and said that they had come to different conclusions. Exactly because the monkeys are dangerous, and they simply need her supervision. After a while, they began to play with each other and run around the garden while our heroine watched them. At that moment, Alois turned to the saint, and she told him to speak. The boy said he was the kind of person who would sacrifice the life of one to save two. Taking a piece of pie, he said that in such a situation, nothing would stop him. Looking at her, he asked what she would do. Our heroine said she didn't even know. Most likely, if she were a judge, she would sacrifice herself to save the threes. However, he said that everything could change if someone truly special came into his life. The value of this person must be comparable to tens, if not hundreds of lives. Looking at her, he asked whom she would choose. The girl thought for a moment, and then asked His Highness a counter-question. The guy said he'd probably have to sacrifice that special person. Our heroine was surprised. The guy in turn said that if this person was special, then he should understand his choice. The girl said that sounded impressive. The action takes us back to Emilian's room. The girl asked how many letters they had. Lenevin told her that, not counting the others, there were 31. After she announced that she was leaving the empire in front of the crown prince and the aristocrats, people started writing to her from everywhere. The high society fears that without her, they will have no one to deal with the monsters. The girl ordered all these letters to be burned. The guy said that he would obey, but taking one of the letters, he said in bewilderment that there was even a letter from the palace. Our heroine said it was a classic since they come every day. However, Lenevin said the sender was Yuina Pervina. The girl asked again. Surprised, Lenevin explained that all the emperor's children, with the exception of the crown prince, bore this surname. Our heroine asked in surprise if the emperor really had any living descendants. It was the first time she'd heard that name. However, as soon as she read the letter, her face changed to a more cheerful one. It was quite funny. She soon clutched the letter and said she would never forgive it if it was true. Lenevin asked in surprise what it was. The girl told the high priest that she would explain everything a little later, so she asked him to call Jessie here because they were going to the palace. The golden letter is under a spell that only the ruling family possesses, and which accordingly only its representatives can remove. In other words, whether the content is true or not, the letter was indeed written by someone from the imperial family. After a while, our heroine Lenevin and Jessie Fotra, along with 2 monkeys, were ready to go to the palace to sort things out. Sometime later, Jessie Fotra asked the lady if this letter could be true. The things written in it were too cruel. Lenevin, by the way, said he was even concerned by the overly detailed content. Emilian said that if the letter was forged, the author would be held accountable for their actions. If the phrase about the experimental human turns out to be true, the palace will suffer a great punishment. The palace's actions have always gone beyond human understanding, and what happens there is no longer surprising. Please save me before you leave. Prince Yuina's letter keeps popping into her head. Her emotions are raging, but she's trying her best not to give in to them. After some time, our heroes found themselves in the palace, and quite quickly, one way or another, our heroine began to walk past people, and Lenevin ordered them all to disperse. As soon as our heroine entered, a certain man stopped the lady and asked her to wait. He welcomed this divine gift. Emilian nevertheless asked where the emperor was now. The man looked down and began to say something unintelligible. Of course, Saint Emilian told him to tell it like it is, and not even think about lying to her. The man sighed heavily and said that His Majesty was now in the backyard. The girl patted him on the shoulder and said that she was grateful to the senior servant Balchain for his help. She'd heard that everyone with even a slight chance of claiming the throne was already dead. Could it be that the child had been left behind specifically for experimentation? The letter states that Prince Yuina's birth mother was an elf, meaning His Highness is half-elf. Thanks to their powerful life energy, elves are able to heal. So perhaps the prince is capable of this too. Emilian said that was true. He serves as a guinea pig and a first aid kit in case any of the ruling family is harmed. According to the letter, Prince Uina Pervena has the ability to heal any wound, and in this situation, the palace does not need to rely on the temple. However, the prince is still subjected to experimentation, because after the wound is healed, he cannot use his powers for some time. Lenevin said, in other words, that his ability had its downsides. Emilian angrily retorted that it was true, as unfortunate as it sounded. After some time, our heroine finally met face to face with the emperor, who said at the meeting that they had not seen each other for quite some time. He assumed she was now ready to engage in dialogue, but the girl said she no longer intended to tolerate such treatment. The man, perplexed, said that first she was abandoning the empire, and now she didn't like his treatment. So why so many complaints? Emilian sighed and assumed he didn't care what she said. Our heroine turned to Lenevin and asked him to summon the priests and holy knights to the palace. The boy said he would obey her. At that moment, the emperor jumped up from his chair in bewilderment and asked what she had just said. Our heroine smiled at him and said that she hadn't said anything that he should worry about. The man still shouted and said that the palace was the territory of the ruling family, so she was violating his rights. Our heroine suddenly turned to him and asked if he had forgotten the time when he sent his knights to her temple. She did the same. Looking at him, she reminded him that the emperor had also asked her not to worry. The emperor was losing control, and soon he was shouting at her, telling her she was comparing two completely different things. Even a saint had no right to rule here. The man even started to catch his breath after hearing such screams. Emilian, however, told him she could say the same thing. It is forbidden to impose one's own rules in the temple, and especially not for people like him. At that very moment, the man grabbed his sword and started shouting that she didn't dare tell him what to do. However, it was an all-too-expected move on the part of the crazy and nervous old man. At that very moment, a loud explosion sounded behind him, which smashed his chair into pieces. The emperor turned around in bewilderment, and our heroine apologized for this incident. However, she assured him that if he made her repeat it again, she would do something worse. Soon she told Jesse and Lenevin to stay put, and that she had somewhere to go. The letter said that Prince Uina Pervena was imprisoned at the end of the Rose Road near the Scarlet Wall. The palace grounds were too large to find the prince using such a small clue. However, as if by God's grace, Prince Alois, who was greeting her at that moment, appears on our heroine's person. The guy said that he was nearby, so he came over to say that if she needed help, he could help her out. She understood that her arrival had undoubtedly caused a stir. The girl suddenly asked if the prince had seen a boy of about 12 in the palace. Our heroine said that she was talking about a child in whom the blood of a fantastic race flows. The girl was very glad that Alois was here. He could try to prove his worth if he truly wanted to side with her. The guy suddenly said that if they were thinking about having a child together, he would tell her. Our heroine smiled and asked if that meant he knew about the Path of Roses by the Scarlet Wall. Alois smiled back and said he could definitely help her. In that case, Emilian promised that, in case of danger, she would promise to protect him. However, the guy turned to the saint and told her that it was not at all necessary to say this. And again, how skillfully he speaks, another phrase to win her favor, but. The guy told her that she always protects someone, but it would be nice to sometimes be in the place of the one being protected. Our heroine said that was entirely possible. Still, if his lies brought her comfort, then it wasn't so bad. After a while, they were making their way through the thicket. Alois warned Emilian to be careful, as the rose bushes were enchanted. Even if you cut them off, new ones will soon sprout and spew poison. Now our heroine understood why they had grown together like that. Anyway, the guy said that walking through them in shoes was a reckless act, so he would take her in his arms. The girl started to say that she didn't want to cause him any inconvenience, but he told her that she could consider it a way to thank her for saving people. Soon he picked her up, despite her pleas to stop. He then said it was time to move on. So he began to cut down the rose bushes and at the same time hold Emilian in his hands. Our heroine understood that if they simply walked in here without a knife, disaster would happen. Alois suddenly asked the saint to close her eyes for a second. The girl asked why, and the guy said that there were soldiers created by magic here, so he didn't want her to see the brutal scenes. Emilian then decided to agree. Alois pulled her closer and told her she was smart. Soon a battle and the sounds of struggle began. Our heroine kept her eyes closed, but said that if there were monsters here, she could destroy them. The guy suggested that to do this, she would need to see the target with her own eyes. Emilian told him he was right. In that case, Prince Alois told her that it was best to leave everything as is. He explained this by saying that they were dealing with corpses that were stepping on them. He chopped them down left and right, saying that they were badly decomposed, shriveled remains that stubbornly crawled and moved. Our heroine began to apologize for leaving it to him. However, at that moment, the guy said that they were there so they could open their eyes. Emilian thanked him for his help and apologized for the inconvenience. The guy put her down and said everything was fine. Soon they glanced at the building. Alois asked if this was the place she was looking for. Emilian told him that she thought it was. At that very moment, she saw a cheerful child behind her who was following a butterfly. Our heroine was perplexed because this child's aura was purer than that of the priest's. This must be Prince Uina Pervena. Suddenly, the boy noticed strangers and asked in surprise who they were. There shouldn't be any strangers here after all. Our heroine told him she was there at the invitation of His Highness, who was suffering from illness. She asked if she could stay. The boy screamed in disbelief and asked if this had really happened. Was it really a priestess standing before him? Our heroine said she came here because the prince was ill. The boy still couldn't believe his ears. Uina said the professor spoke as if he didn't expect a reply. So it turns out he did send her a letter. However, at that moment, Emilian was examining him and noticed something strange. When divine power is introduced, it immediately seeps out. How deep must the wound be then? At that very moment, she lifted his sleeve and noticed the injection marks. She knew it. In any case, Emilian asked the prince why he'd written to her. He said he'd heard she was leaving the empire and wanted to get help before she left. Either way, he smiled, saying he hadn't expected her to answer him so quickly. He was grateful. Nevertheless, our heroine asked Prince Uina Pervena to tell her a little more about herself. Soon they were sitting at the table, and the boy was saying that this was the first time anyone had come here at his invitation. They couldn't imagine how surprised he was. Alois, nevertheless, began to turn his head from side to side and ask if there was anyone here besides the prince. Uina Pervena smiled and said that he was not a prince, so he asked to just call him Uina. In any case, he said that there are countless people here, and they are replaced about once a month. At this point, our heroine was rather surprised by the words about the prince, so she asked what it meant. The boy explained that the emperor did not consider him a human being, and therefore, he did not deserve the title of crown prince. There was a short pause between them, which was interrupted by Alois, who said that the emperor had not been mistaken after all. The boy looked at Alois in bewilderment, and he told him that it wasn't only human blood that flowed through him. The guy sighed and said that it was so, and that was why they were keeping him here. However, Alois said that he meant that Prince Uina was too beautiful to be a commoner. The boy looked at Alois in surprise. He told him that it's human nature to want what you don't have. With all due respect, His Majesty was one of those people. He simply doesn't want to let Uina leave here because of her beauty. At this point, Uina Pervena looked at the guests in surprise and asked if he could go outside at least once.